Welcome to a meeting of your Planning Commission, the official local planning agency for the cities of Tampa, Temple Terrace, Plant City, and unincorporated Hillsborough County. The Planning Commission provides innovative leadership and long-range vision that contributes to the creation of a thriving, prosperous community that offers opportunity, fairness, and choice in how we live, move, learn, work, and play. For more information about the Planning Commission, please call 813-272-5940. Follow us on social media or visit our website at planhillsborough.org.
Good evening and welcome to the May 14th, 2018 public hearing of the Planning Commission on Tampa Comprehensive Plan Amendments. We thank you for attending this meeting. Your comments and participation are encouraged. If you will, please sign the register at the rear of the room and turn off any devices that may be a distraction. If you wish to address the Commission on a specific amendment, we ask that you please complete the appropriate public comment sign-in sheet at the rear of the room now. When addressing the Commission, we ask that you begin with your name and address and speak directly into the microphone. And for those of you who are not familiar with our process, the meeting will be conducted as follows. Agenda item will be introduced, and staff will give a presentation with a 15-minute time limit. The applicant will be given an opportunity to make a presentation with a 15-minute time limit. Following presentations, members of the public may address the Planning Commission when recognized by the chair, and public comment will be heard for 3 minutes per person. The applicant will then be afforded a 3-minute period for rebuttal or response. Planning commissioners will ask questions. Public comment will be closed, and upon a motion and a second and discussion, a vote will be taken. Can we have roll call, please?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Buzzup? Here. Dix? Green? Joseph?
Here.
Kress? Here. Marino?
Here. He was on the phone.
Thrower? Here. Waltz?
Here.
Farkas? Rodriguez?
Here.
Dowdy?
Here.
And Metzger?
Here.
You have a quorum?
Thank you. Before we launch into our regular order, there are 2 plan amendments that have noticing error problems that we need to address. The first is TACPA 18-04, Future Land Use Amendment for 7701 South O'Brien Street. We need to have a motion to continue that amendment to the June 11th, 2018 public hearing at 5:30 p.m.
I move that we continue that TACPA-1804 to the next meeting.
Second.
Have a motion by Commissioner Buzza and a second by Commissioner Marino to continue TACPA 18-04 to the June 11th, 2018 5:30 p.m. meeting based due to noticing issues. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously by members present. The second one of these issues is item TACPA 18-05, Future Land Use Amendment on 1607 North Manhattan Avenue. I also understand that there are noticing issues associated with that amendment. Same conditions apply. I need a motion.
I move that we continue TACPA 18-05, Future Land Use and Map Amendment to the next meeting.
Second.
Have a motion by Commissioner Buzza and a second by Commissioner Wiles to continue TA/CPA 18-05 to the June 11th, 2018 public hearing at 5:30 p.m. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously by members present. Great. That carries us to item number 2 on our agenda, TACPA 17-10, Future Land Use Map Amendment for North Rocky Point.
Commissioners, David Hay with your Planning Commission staff. The first amendment for your review is TACPA 1710, a proposed map amendment to the future land use map. The proposed amendment is located in the West Shore Planning District, and more specifically on the north half of Rocky Point. Here we have an aerial of the subject site. It's outlined in gold. It's currently water. It's the Rocky Point Basin. So this is Courtney Campbell Causeway. You've got, of course, TIA, Memorial Highway that goes into the Veterans, Dana Shores neighborhood, and this is all of Rocky Point. A little background about the request. It is a privately initiated small-scale map amendment. Currently, the approximate size is roughly 3 acres of a larger 8.8 acre subject site. Currently, it is water. It's the Rocky Point Basin. It is zoned residential multifamily 24, even though it is water. The applicant is seeking a residential 35 future land use category for that 3 acre portion. Next, we'll take a little tour around the basin. Here we're looking northwest toward the subject site from North Rocky Point Drive. The green area in the front is Scarborough Park, a private park affiliated with the HOA there on Rocky Point. Here we move into Scarborough Park and we're looking across the portion of the subject site to the northeast. Here, we're looking northeast across the subject site toward North Rocky Point Drive. You can see the Westin Hotel in the background. Here we're in Scarborough Park looking south toward Courtney Campbell Causeway. The subject site is behind in the photo. And here's a sign for Scarborough Park. It's kind of unique. It is not a public park. It's a private park affiliated with the HOA there on Rocky Point. Next, onto the currently adopted future land use map. You can see the subject site is that water. The properties surrounding the site in that pink color are the community mixed use 35. The northern tip of the Rocky Point is that residential 35. And then you actually get to the south some urban mixed use 60 future land use categories, and then some environmentally sensitive areas out on the Courtney Campbell Causeway. And then this is unincorporated county, and this is also environmentally sensitive up here. If approved, the map would change as shown. The basin, the southern portion of the basin would go to that residential 35 future land use category. Let's look at the impacts regarding the subject request. Of course, since it's water, it's 0 units and there's no square footage, even though it is zoned at that RM 24. If it's permitted to fill, which I'll get into later in the presentation, it could be considered up to 105 units or a maximum of 78,408 square feet. The proposed amendment would allow for a future land use category consistent with the existing RM24 zoning found on site. Agency reviews, of course, we send this all out to our partners, and a number of them had comments about the request. Those are included. The City of Tampa did object to the request, and their comments are provided within your packet. And staff is here also, I believe, to address their comments a little later. A little additional background about this. This request does not permit fill. That's a completely separate process. It has to go in front of EPC and SwiftMud and all that. So this does not grant any permits to fill or alter anything out there currently as of right now. Staff determined that as defined by the comprehensive plan, that it does not meet the definition of wetland as described in our comprehensive plan. And again, delineation is required at time of permitting if when they go in for site development to delineate if there's any wetlands out there once it's filled or how that fill will impact those wetlands. going to go over our little outline. It is a longer presentation than average to explain staff's position, so I wanted to give you a little outline. It touches on numerous policies about the city's growth strategy, the City of Tampa's business centers, which have specific policies within the comp plan. It also touches on the land development code and how that works with the comp plan. It touches on numerous environmental policies and is also, we discuss the coastal high hazard and the objective of the coastal high hazard area to have no net increase within the coastal high hazard area. So we'll start going through that. Planning Commission staff reviewed the comprehensive plan and found that the proposed request for the community mixed use, for the residential 35 would be consistent with the overall adopted policy guidance within the comprehensive plan. The first area of consistency is the promotion of residential development in the business center, which West Shore is one of those identified areas. The West Shore Business District is the state's largest office district with a large segment of parcels located within the coastal high hazard area. Land Use Policy 2.1.1 encourages compact, higher density development that is surrounding that is compatible with the surrounding development pattern. The residential 35 future land use category is comparable to the surrounding community mixed use 35 future land use category. Policy 9.4.1 specifically encourages high density residential in the city's business centers, while policy 9.6.3 encourages areas with multifamily residential development to be designated for additional multifamily residential to increase overall housing opportunities, while infrastructure policy 1.1.18 promotes a residential development pattern consistent with that compact city form. So looking at the R35 category, it is consistent and comparable with that surrounding community mixed use 35 category. Comprehensive Plan Land Use Objective 8.13 directs that, quote, all existing and future land development regulations shall be made consistent with the comprehensive plan, unquote. The adopted zoning of RM24 existed at the time of the adoption of the comprehensive plan, and no known effort has been undertaken to comply with the comprehensive plan policy. The current situation with property currently zoned at RM24 but not having a future land use designation is inconsistent with adopted comprehensive plan policies, especially Land Use Policy 8.13.2. The proposed amendment would bring the site into compliance by providing a future land use designation consistent with current zoning. The comprehensive plan recognizes the separate processes through Environmental Policy 1.18.2 by directing the Planning Commission to, quote, recommend disapproval to appropriate entities, unquote, any requests that seek fill or dredging activity within areas of significant seagrass. There is no evidence of seagrass observed at the site or provided by mapping provided by the Southwest Florida Water Management District. Environmental Policy 1.19.2 allows for consideration of dredge and fill operations, but again recognizes that there is a separate process for the dredge and fill activities. The comprehensive plan does support the protection and conservation of remaining coastal wetlands, living marine resources, and wildlife habitat in the Tampa Bay estuary. That's the Environmental Objective 1.20. The man-made lagoon has already been greatly altered since the 1920s and is not located within an area of seagrass, again, as identified by the Southwest Florida Water Management District, or an area identified in the comprehensive plan as significant wildlife habitat. You've seen in the report how Rocky Point has morphed through the years. Those graphs were provided in your packet. The applicant has committed on the record and in documentation provided to you all in your packet to helping to improve overall water quality by seeking ways to capture, combine and treat off-site previously untreated runoff with on-site stormwater. The project is able to demonstrate the required net improvement reduction in nutrient runoff into the harbor. This effort is consistent with policy direction in the plan that talks about working toward improving overall water quality. Next, the comprehensive plan also seeks to limit development within the coastal high hazard area to uses that are, quote, water enhanced, water related, or water dependent, or consistent with the Port Tampa Master Plan. Based on the adopted definitions, residential development would be considered a water enhanced use. The subject site also has a current residential multifamily 24 zoning designation. The comprehensive plan seeks to limit, not prohibit, new development in the coastal high hazard area to uses vested or shown on the future land use map. Due to the existing RM24 zoning district found on site, the proposal for a residential 35 future land use designation would be consistent with the policy direction regarding development within the coastal high hazard area. Though the comprehensive plan seeks to direct population growth away from the coastal high hazard area, the comprehensive plan does not prohibit changes to future land use designations within areas designated as coastal high hazard. The plan promotes a balancing act of providing no net increase. And to explain staff's findings regarding the objective of no net increase, we're going to need to go back in time to 1995. Here we have the peninsula, Rocky Point, from an aerial in 1995. You can see here's, again, Courtney Campbell. You could see there wasn't a lot of development at that time on Rocky Point. It's basically the same shape as it currently is, but there was no development. We're going to zoom in to an area just located to the east of Rocky Point. This is the Courtney Campbell Causeway going out, and Rocky Point's right off the side there. This is Dana Shores. This is property that FDOT started to acquire. And let me back up. Zooming in, you can see there's approximately 8.8 acres of developable land located on the north side of the Courtney Campbell Causeway. Approximately, it's about 4,000 feet east of the subject site. It is in the coastal high hazard area. Most, if not all, of the land was at the time developed for commercial uses. There was even a Red Lobster out there. I remember eating it. At this time, these properties were designated as heavy commercial 24, which allowed consideration of up to 24 dwelling units per acre, or a maximum of a 1.5 floor area ratio. Beginning around the year 2000, the Florida Department of Transportation acquired these properties to allow for the expansion of the Courtney Campbell Causeway and to construct Bayport Drive, which you could see now it's all changed and now it's all right-of-way. Based on the heavy commercial 24 future land use designation, this 8.82 acres of property could have been considered for a maximum of 211 units. The removal of these sites and their development potential reduced the overall density within the coastal high hazard area. Based on this information and the close proximity of this area to our subject site, Planning Commission staff has determined that the proposed future land use map amendment is consistent with the intent of the coastal management objectives and policies and would not provide for a net increase in population based on, with your net, there's reductions in other places and there's increases in others. So this has demonstrated that there was a reduction in the surrounding area and that it meets the intent of Coastal Management Objective 1.1. In Planning Commission staff review, the proposed request, staff found still other unique circumstances pertaining to the subject site. Rocky Point was a development of regional impact. This DRI allowed for a maximum of 529,000 square feet of office uses, which through an equivalency matrix could be exchanged for residential units. Since approximately 454,274 square feet of office uses has been developed, approximately 170 residential units could still be considered on Rocky Point based on that equivalency matrix. Infrastructure improvements were constructed to handle the proposed impacts from the maximum development of Rocky Point. Also, due to the required access agreement through the privately owned property to the south, which is Scarborough Park, the subject site, based on that private agreement, which should be in your packet, limits the subject site to 16 residential units. If they develop over 16, by that agreement, they lose their access to through the park. The applicant, in accordance with the coastal management element of the Tampa Comprehensive Plan, will be required to mitigate the pro rata cost of hurricane evacuation shelter space in accordance with the local mitigation strategy adopted by Tampa City Council pursuant to Resolution number 99-1864. If the proposed plan amendment is approved and the developer proceeds, the issues of the roadway network and clearance times along evacuation routes will be reviewed during the rezoning process in accordance with adopted evacuation plans and land development regulations. It should be noted that the local mitigation strategy, which includes the shelter retrofit program, is addressed in the Hillsborough County Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan and overseen by the Hillsborough County Emergency Management Office. Based on the above listed information, Planning Commission staff has determined that the proposed amendment would not negatively impact established hurricane evacuation times, and that additional review will occur at the time of permitting. So after that very lengthy presentation, based on that, the Planning Commission staff recommends to you this evening that TA CPA 1710 be found consistent with the Imagine 2040 Tampa Comprehensive Plan. That
Thank you.
concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hay. Does the applicant wish to make a presentation? City staff? Okay, I'm sorry. Hang on a minute. Hang on a minute.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good evening, Commissioners. LaShawn Dock, Planning and Development. City Planning staff has reviewed the request, and we have objections to the request. We find it inconsistent with several comprehensive plan policies and objectives. You'll find the city's comments within your packet. I wanted to review a couple of those objectives and policies with you this evening. It's important to note that some of the objections that were found are relating to open space in the coastal high hazard area. On the second page of the city's report, Land Use Objective 4.2 states to protect open space for its recreational, safety, and environmental value and provide adequate parks and open space areas throughout the city. The site, as you know, where the area under the request is a body of water. So the applicant is proposing through their request transportation access to the site on the southern boundary of the location of the body of water. That is currently where the park is located. Staff had concerns regarding the elimination of part of that open space, which currently contains a trail and park benches and a view of the bay. Also, within the coastal management section under Objective 1.1, it states to direct future population concentrations away from the coastal high hazard area so as to achieve no net increase in overall residential density within the coastal high hazard area. So this request is a body of water. Staff has concerns relating to the allowable density under the requested R35 land use category within the coastal high hazard area. The approval of any residential density on the parcel would result in an increase in residential density in the area of the coastal high hazard area, which would result in an increase, and it would direct future population. It would not direct it away from the coastal high hazard area, but it would actually introduce additional residential into the coastal high hazard area. When staff's reviewing the request, we must consider the maximum development potential allowed under the requested land use category. So the request is the R35 land use designation, which allows typically for a building height of up to 8 stories. Under this request, given that this site contains 3 acres, the development potential is 105 dwelling units, which could be developed, and that is a concern for staff. The applicant, I must state for the record, has reached out to city staff and city's legal department to discuss the application request. We've met with the applicant on several occasions. In the initial meetings, the applicant did state that he was working on a settlement agreement in place to limit the development, because the applicant has stated from the beginning that it is not his intent to maximize the R35 development potential. By the time we had our last meeting, that settlement agreement was complete. It was reviewed by our legal department. Staff has concerns because we have no way of tying that settlement agreement to the land use amendment request. Between the process of the future land use map amendment being approved and the actual development process to get a building permit, there's no way to tie it back to the agreement to limit the development potential. So what staff did recommend was two things: that the applicant apply for rezoning. At the time of application for the rezoning, to request an RM16 zoning designation, which is a Euclidean zoning district. It does not require site plan for submittal. Also to amend their current request to an R20 request. That lowers the development potential over that body of water under the request. The applicant's representative did contact me back. He reached out to me last week, and he did state, given the timing of the request, just because the city's request was made to the applicant less than 2 weeks ago. So, and it is my understanding the applicant had already requested 2 continuances, and for the process of timing, they just had to move forward tonight. Also, the request, the city's request for the RM16 zoning, while it would meet their unit requirements that the applicant is proposing, that would not allow them to have the height that they would like to have on their proposed development. So we're back to, it would be a PD rezoning if that were the case. But we were looking at something that would run concurrent with the land use amendment. It's just in our meetings that were held, we just didn't come to a resolution soon enough to have comments to you prior to this hearing tonight. So that's why they're not included in the packet, but that's the city's findings, and I'm available if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Dock. Does the applicant wish to make a presentation?
Anybody else that needs to speak? Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I am Michael Horner, 14502 North Dale Mabry Highway, Tampa, Florida, 33618, representing the applicant and the ownership interest, which is Rocky Point Harbor Basin LLC. With me this evening is Mr. David Dickey, a managing partner for that partnership. You have been here for a while. You have a long agenda following. I think there's a couple continuances, but I know you've got a full agenda. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible, Commissioners, but this is a little bit of a unique case, so I need to get right to the facts of it. You have a number of issues before you. First and foremost, let me thank the planning staff. I think utmost professional. I think they have worked diligently. When I went through that report, I want to say the report is almost 175 pages. Our documents and appendix contributed probably 100 of those pages, but we wanted to have sufficient information on the record for you all to represent and render your decision. We have particular interest in supporting Tony and David's recommendation because they have taken the time to sort through these detailed issues. And it's not easy. This is, I think, not a complicated matter. But I think, looking back, we are thankful that we bumped this case from last cycle to the current CPA cycle. So the recommendation before you is thorough. It is well evaluated. It addresses all the respective evaluation impact assessments. The findings of fact on the application were considered. And I think it's been one of the most impressive professional planning reports that I've read in some time. And I've been in this business 35 plus years. I would direct your attention in particular, Commissioners, to pages 9 through 12 of the staff report. This offers a thorough historical summary. I think David hit the highlights of it. It summarizes the property and the North Rocky Point development in general between 1921 and 1989, as well as the respective dredge and fill activities in that area. Quite simply, Commissioners, if it wasn't for this man-made borrow pit, a good portion of North Rocky Point would not be in existence today. So that is the source of the fill for Rocky Point. It is a man-made borrow pit, and I think David appropriately considered that in their recommendation. In order to assist staff, Commissioners, and address a number of issues that were forthcoming through this review process, and also address the concerns of the stakeholders, most importantly being the Rocky Point Property Owner Association. We have dealt with them for almost 18 months, and we are pleased to stand before you with their unanimous approval negotiated between our team and the Property Owner Association's attorney. What did that result in? It resulted in a very restrictive development agreement that, as David noted for the record, and we filed into the record, a limitation for only 16 attached townhomes, docks, and a private gated driveway to North Rocky Point Drive. Additionally, Commissioners, we filed a detailed summary letter from Mr. David Felice of Terra Law Firm. That's also in your backup. Why is that important? Because Mr. Felice was the actual attorney of record for the Rocky Point DRI back in the 1980s. If anyone knows the background of the Rocky Point DRI, it's Mr. David Felice. And I would also note for the record that the attorney for the Property Owner Association of Rocky Point is Mr. David Mechanic, who I think you all know, land use attorney in the Tampa area. So he was an acting city attorney at that time. Actually, he was the city attorney at that time for land use and zoning matters, and reviewed and recommended approval and signed off on the development order agreement. So the two top individuals from both the government regulatory side and the private sector side for this Rocky Point DRI have been involved throughout this process, and we stand in unison before you. Secondly, as David pointed out, that we have significantly more development entitlements available. The Rocky Point DRI has not developed to its full potential, and if you utilize the equivalency buffer matrix table, it actually allows for, as David mentioned, up to 170 additional units. So that doesn't get us into the proposed development. That gets us into a no net increase because we are still within the reserve of that allowance under the existing entitlements. So we could have asked for up to 170 units, and overall it would still represent a no net increase. Why is that important? Because we are only seeking, through that detailed agreement, less than 10% of those available entitlements. So we're allowed for 170. We're asking for 16 townhomes, which is part of that developer agreement. It's binding. It's legal. We have no option, no flexibility. We cannot amend it. That agreement is locked in, and we are asking for less than 10% of those available entitlements. The third document, Commissioners, within the appendix document that we filed, is a report by Water Resource Associates. It's about a 4 or 5 page report, has an exhibit, talks about natural seagrass beds are not existing in this basin. We have no natural seagrass beds. That is why David went into the non-wetland finding and also the non-CHH, coastal high hazard area, implications. So the ecological quality of this drainage basin, being an impaired basin, is minimal. In addition to that, there is no seagrass. And in addition to that, as David mentioned, we now have the opportunity to do a stormwater pond as part of our project that can actually take that runoff that is currently not treated and allow for the filtration, receiving, discharge into the basin that my clients now have a vested interest on. They want to make sure that basin is clean and the water quality is certainly protected because they have a vested interest for these 16 townhome owners. If I can just slide to a graphic. This is what we're talking about. This is an exhibit. It's what we filed. While the specific architectural details have yet to be worked out, that is the extent of the 3 acres of the fill. That is the extent of the number of units proposed and allowed for by the binding agreement with the Property Owner Association. While the Res 35 plan category does permit up to 105 units, we get that. 35 units per acre times 3 acres gets you the 105, as well as 78,000 square feet utilizing the FAR of 0.6 in the Res 35. That is technically correct. But as David noted in his report, you need to put an asterisk on those numbers because we cannot come even close to those entitlements. Number one, we don't have the zoning in place. It's RM24 that would allow for any non-residential uses. So you have a cap on the zoning that precludes any non-residential use, no commercial, no office. And secondly, we cannot exceed the 16 townhomes by the legally binding restricted covenant between the property owner association. So not only do we have the restriction on the acreage of the 3, we have the restriction on the RM24, and then we have the further restriction by the 16 townhomes. Since this property is already zoned RM24, it is already consistent with our proposed land use sector. I think David made that clear. If we filed for an RM16 zoning district, would be immediately inconsistent with the the RM24 in place and the Res 35 that we're being proposed. The RM16 that we have considered for the city of Tampa, in fact, the deadline was today to file it. We said we just cannot do that, LaShawn. We appreciate your support for that. But if we file for that RM16, as David Haight noted in our discussion, we would have an immediate inconsistency with the existing plan categories. So we do not feel that those prerequisites are not only fair, but I think they're non-factual and they're not applicable because we already have RM24 in place. And in fact, RM24 allows for this single-family attached townhome development just perfect. We don't need any waivers, any variances. The Rocky Point Apartments to our north and east have about 330 apartments. Our proposed development has a gross density of 2 units per acre. That's 16 units on 3 acres. If you look at even the net density would be at 5.3 units per acre. Those are densities that are very low, very suburban, not even near the representative densities and intensities on the Rocky Point Island itself for the community. This is a closed basin. It is a non-navigable waterway. It does not have any through connections. It is constructed with a seawall. There is no abutting ownership interests that have any legal access, water rights, riparian rights, visual or use rights as part of these agreements with the property owner association. That is why we sat down and the property owner association at Rocky Point said, let's find a land use and an intensity level that makes sense for both parties. And that is why we restricted this to only 16 single-family attached townhomes. As LaShawn mentioned, the City of Tampa staff did file their initial report some time ago. We did a follow-up meeting in January of this year. We did another follow-up meeting, I want to say 6 weeks ago, maybe 4 to 6 weeks in April. It was a good meeting. We did not hear anything back until I have the email in front of me, which I'll file into the record on May 2nd. And that's where they asked us to amend this Res 35 to Res 20, and then immediately file for an RM16 that had to be filed for today that would go before City Council. We were unable to do so, as I mentioned prior. We have RM24 zoning in place. It is a consistent zoning district, and the Res 35 is a consistent plan sector for the RM24 zoning. Plus, we have a height limitation. The RM16 does not allow the height. We would not be capped at 35 feet. In the RM24, we would be capped at 35 feet in the RM16, so it would not accommodate our proposal. In closing, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, let me just close with 6 points. Number one, this is a man-made drainage basin with very limited natural habitat and no natural seagrass beds. Number two, this request is completely consistent with all existing uses, plan categories, and zoning districts in the Rocky Point community and the DRI. This is noted by staff in their report. 3, while this is not a zoning permit venue tonight, I don't want to get into the weeds on details. We do have the benefit of a very detailed and binding legally restricted covenant with the property owner association. 16 townhomes, that is all we can do. I realize that you have in front of you a table that shows 105 units and 78,000 square feet of non-residential uses. We cannot achieve that by the existing zoning, and we certainly cannot achieve that by the covenants that are restricted on site. Mind you, we have lots of future permitting ahead. We have to work with EPC and SWIFTBUD, Army Corps, et cetera, on the filling of this basin. We have every reasonable probability of getting those permits. It's not going to be quick. It's not going to be inexpensive, but that is not part of your purview tonight, and we have every indication those permits will be forthcoming in the next year to two. 5 of the properties I mentioned is already zoned RM24. It was anticipated in the 80s by the city of Tampa that this would be appropriate for multifamily development. Why it was lacking a consistent plant sector designation, I'm not sure, and the city had no answers. But clearly the RM24 is in place, it restricts us now, and our proposed development plan is completely consistent with the RM24 zoning district, which does not allow any commercial or office. Lastly, Commissioners, there is no net increase. Ms. Dock stood here just a minute ago and told you this is an increase. There is no net increase. Why is that? Because the Rocky Point DRI is already approved for X amount of units and X amount of square feet that still allows for another 170 units just under existing approvals. We don't have to do anything to request that. No NOPC, no DRI amendments. So we're only asking for 10% of that residual amount. So there is no net increase. Forget the HC24 and the other site to the east that's being acquired under public acquisition that David Hay referenced. There is no net increase on this portion of the Rocky Point DRI. That is why the policy that they cited on page 7, I believe, Environmental Policy 1.182, actually permits the dredge and fill operations where there are no natural seagrass beds. And then 2, the no natural or the no net increase addresses all the traffic and infrastructure improvements because it was anticipated to have an additional 170 units or the corresponding traffic associated with another 67,000 square feet of office. So bottom line, we have worked hard. We have tried to make this as simple as possible. We appreciate staff's diligent review. They have been more than patient receiving all of our documents. We wish the city of Tampa could have recognized this a month ago, but after we sat down with them, we think we did have their support until I got the email that said, yes, but you have to file this immediately. This case makes sense. This recommendation to you is well done. It is thorough. This is consistent with all applicable policies, goals, and objectives of your comprehensive plan. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Horner. I have a number of people who have signed up to speak on this item. I'm going to go through these in the order in which they've basically been handed to me, and I will apologize if I butcher your name, but some of you have better handwriting than me, but I still can't read it. So I will start. The first person is David Dickey. Do you wish to speak? Your name and address, and you will have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is David Dickey, and as Mr. Horner said, I'm the managing partner for Rocky Point Harbor Basin LLC. My comments will be brief. Just a thank you to the staff and to the commissioners as we have continued this. This is the third and final time, and we very much appreciate the diligence in working with everyone at all levels of the Planning Commission and appreciate the work that we've been doing with the city and believe that'll continue between now and the City of Tampa public hearing that'll occur on May 29th. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir. Next person signed up to speak on this item is a Jason Girari. Okay. Margaret Bowles.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Bowles. I'm an attorney. I represent the Dana Shores Civic Association. And on behalf of my client, we are objecting to the plan amendment, basically on the same grounds the City of Tampa staff already, you have it in your packet, and I'm not going to go through all of their plan and policy justifications for their objections. We'd like to incorporate those into our objections. But for the most part, the problem with it is that the subject is actually located in water, open water. Those of us in Dana Shores, and I live in the Dana Shores community, we own the bottom. We own, like our houses, we own what's adjacent to it. And so the question we have, the concern we have is that if this is permitted to go through this plan amendment, you know, where does it basically stop? Can we all go in and ask for development in the open waters? And we feel like that this would be setting a precedence for that. And so we're objecting on those grounds. And also, In the land use plan, it states that the city must find ways to effectively manage the increases in population and employment. The city must minimize the negative impacts of increasing population and expanding commerce throughout the metropolitan region on environmentally sensitive lands, and I recognize that this is not environmentally sensitive lands, but it also says on open spaces and their effect on air quality, and water supplies. So on the grounds of that the city needs to protect its open space for its recreational, safety, and environmental value and provide adequate parks and open space throughout the city. This is taking 3 acres of water. It's water. It's not land. It's water that people use and boat in, and so we're concerned as a neighborhood adjacent to this that it's just going to start a trend toward the completion of development in that area, and so we are objecting on those grounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowles. Next person signed up to speak is Stephen Michelini.
Commissioner Steve Michelini, I'm representing the Westin Hotel that's adjacent to Scarborough Park and probably one of the closest property owners near this. We're objecting strenuously to this proposal. There are a variety of reasons. Let me show you on this overhead. As Margaret pointed out, it's water. It's not land. It has no entitlements, never had entitlements for development of any kind, anywhere. Years ago, there was a concept where property owners said when they visited Florida that they had bought land by the inch, by the foot, and by the yard, but never by the gallon. And so in this case, the property owner bought gallons of water. They didn't buy entitlements to property to develop. It has no development rights associated with the land use. They're coming in now to try to establish those, and we're urging you not to provide development rights for water. There are thousands of acres around the city where property owners, as Margaret pointed out, that have property that they own adjacent to their land, but those are uplands, okay? They have no uplands. They only have bay bottom. It also is directly in front of a park. And let me show you the sign right here. For the tenants and employees and guests, this park is utilized by the current property owners, the Westin Hotel guests, the business and property owners for the offices, and the residences that are associated with the apartments adjacent to this. There are manatees in this area. There are dolphins. There are birds. There are a variety of other species that they're not pointing out. So do you want to disrupt that? I would say no. I mean, the fact that the city and the county staff can't find policies to object doesn't mean it should be approved. We should be going the other way. Where is it that it says that you should fill water to provide development land in front of a park? I couldn't find any. There is no right-of-way frontage. They have an easement running along the side of the park. That's not right-of-way. So there are requirements that they have to meet, and I'm not saying, at this point that they can't meet them in some manner, but where does it stop? Do you leapfrog in front of other properties along the waterfront to establish development rights because somebody comes in and buys the underlying bay bottom? So you have a house or you have another building and somebody buys the bay bottom, they come in and they say, okay, now I want development rights for that. It has to stop. Years ago, there were also a provision to fill Tampa Bay. And there was a whole a proposal that said fill Tampa Bay, fill it and kill it. And they said, no, save the bay. And it stopped. There was no more filling. And the association with that ended up resting here with the Planning Commission and the EPC, where it said, no, we're not going to provide development rights for bay bottom. And it should stop here. It's a bad precedent, and it establishes you as an agency which should be looking at these carefully to protect the water and the waterfront resources and the parks that exist there. It is a bad plan from the beginning, and it's a bad precedent to set. I've already said to you, whether there's DRI capacity or not.
I think your time.
Just one more second. DRI capacity or not, they cannot meet the transportation warrants for capacity on the road network. They're maximized. Whether you had 100,000 more square feet of property to develop.
That's enough. Mr. Clerk, is there a problem with the timer? Is the countdown working?
Yes.
Okay. Just so everybody knows, there's normally a green light, a yellow light, and a red light. Yellow light is supposed to come on when you have 30 seconds left, and the red light comes on when your 3 minutes are up. Everybody has 3 minutes to speak, and
So how much time do I have left?
you're done. You're over.
Just thought I'd ask. No time means I still have 3 more minutes?
I'll let him see if he's. Okay, but the red light's working. All right. Yeah. All right. Well, the red light works and the counter, from what I understand, works, right? Yes. So I'm going to have to ask all of you that are speaking to at least watch the counter. It is right there in front of you to limit your time to the 3 minutes. The next person that we have signed up to speak is a Kelly Smith.
Just yell at me when it gets to be about 10 seconds. That's all. No big deal. I won't take 3 minutes either, I promise you. So my name is Kelly Smith. I'm representing the DoubleTree Suites in Rocky Point. I'm the general manager at the hotel. And I appreciate the time and the opportunity to chat with you a little bit. My hotel was recently purchased and closed on January 10th of this year. And the owners are based in Houston, and they paid a pretty penny for the hotel. And you can guess why they paid a pretty penny for the hotel, because of all the waterfront access that the hotel has. Basically, on all 3 sides, the hotel is surrounded by water. From most of our guest rooms, you can see the bay. You can see Tampa Bay. You can see out towards Dana Shores. You can see Rocky Point Basin that we just talked about. And for each of those rooms that's in our hotel that faces the water, we get a premium for those rooms. You guys travel, you've seen it, you stayed in hotels, right? When you get a great view, you pay more than that person who doesn't get a great view, right? So we're gonna fill in 3 acres of the Rocky Point Basin. There are 8 acres in that Rocky Point Basin, as I understand it. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's 8 acres. We're gonna fill in 3 acres of it. And I got up and I walked down my hallways today, and I went about halfway down the hallway that faces the Rocky Point Basin. And instead of looking at water, I'm going to be looking at 19 or 16 or 235 homes. I don't know how many there are going to be there. But I'm going to be looking at townhomes with docks and jet skis and sailboats and loud boats that are going to cruise by the hotel and cause all kinds of little issues. I also agree with the comments the Weston made regarding the park. I have about 80,000 occupied rooms on an annual basis. My occupied room or guests per room are about 1.5. So if you do the math, I've got about 120,000 guests a year. And I would think a good portion of those guests like to go out and sit at Scarborough Park. And no longer will they be able to sit at the park and enjoy the views of the water. Instead, they'll be looking at the townhomes that are in front of them. And last, but certainly not least, I agree with the precedent-setting issues that are at hand. We have 44 seconds left. So I have ongoing concerns about additional filling of the bay in and around the hotel. Again, the owners of my hotel paid significant dollars for the views and the water and the location of that hotel. If if the 8 acres end up being filled, then that cuts the value of their hotel when they want to resell it substantially. It's a significant issue in our mind and a significant issue in my mind. And then most importantly, if you look at our surveys from our guests, I got 11 seconds, I bet I get 5 comments a day about the dolphins and the manatees that my guests can see from the hotel. Not that this is going to stop them from coming, but it is going to be a problem when they can't get into that 3 acres that's developed. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next person I have signed up to speak is a Sean AMAR.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Sean Amernani, and my firm address is 201 East Kennedy Boulevard, Tampa, Florida. I represent Cousins Property, and my client is also here that will speak after me. In support of recommending this denial of this application, I offer that the Coastal Management Land Use Objective 1.1 of the Comprehensive Plan explicitly makes it an objective to, and I quote, direct future population concentrations away from the coastal high hazard areas so as to achieve no net increase in overall residential density. The applicant keeps quoting the DRI. This property is not part of the DRI. On its face, approving this development would be in direct conflict with this policy. Moreover, there is nothing in this application that explains how this residential extra density in the coastal high hazard area will not put current and future residents of Rocky Point at risk during a hurricane and a storm event. It's a safety issue to develop in the coastal high hazard area, and that's why these policies are in place, to prevent safety issues. Additionally, environmental policy 1.20 explicitly states the objective to, and I quote, protect, conserve, enhance, and restore remaining coastal wetlands, living marine resources, and wildlife habitat in the Tampa Bay estuary. This proposed project directly conflicts with this provision. While the staff report states that the basin is not located in a seagrass area identified by SwiftMud, we don't know when the last time SwiftMud has studied this particular area in depth. And we don't have a third-party environmental study to confirm what the level of the seagrass is and what kind of marine life is in this basin. Moreover, it is our understanding that this Rocky Point Basin was dredged about 60 years ago. In about 60 years, that's about enough. That should be more than enough time to build new marine resources and a new wildlife habitat that directly impacts the Tampa Bay estuary. The applicant has not provided any independent third-party expert reports to prove otherwise. Therefore, the application should be denied on an environmental basis. There are many other legal considerations, but with our limited time today, I'll leave you a copy with some comprehensive plan objectives that the Commission needs to consider. Finally, this is important, but we cannot pinpoint when the last time something like this has occurred in Tampa Bay. Denial of this application is appropriate, but at a minimum, we should all press pause on this so we can research more and determine how many decades ago we're turning back the clock on something like this. And now my client will speak further about the history of the site. Thank you, Commission. And let me pass out the additional comprehensive plan objectives. Thank you.
So I'm assuming your client is a Kyle Bird?
Good evening, Kyle Bird, Cousins Property, 4211 West Cypress, West Boy Scout here in Tampa, 33607. Gang, I guess I would ask you to reflect on this request and think about how you want to proceed with development in the Tampa Bay area. Obviously, we're developers and operators of real estate and investors in real estate. Made a significant bet on Rocky Point with ownership of the Harbor View building and the Point on Rocky Point on the south end. So we don't take this kind of stuff lightly, but we think here with what we've got, a site that's underwater and in a DRI development that it's got to attach itself to that requires some pretty serious reflection on what you're going to do here, because you're talking about I understand view corridors and that kind of thing, and those things, I expect that to happen in urban environments and things like that in CBD business districts. I don't really expect to see that sort of thing in open Tampa Bay. And what we really sell and promote here in the Tampa Bay region, obviously, is the Bay. Our football team is called the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Our baseball team is called the Tampa Bay Rays. Our selling feature for our entire region is the Bay. I mean, I certainly understand why these gentlemen want to develop in the Bay. It's a wonderful place, but I'm not sure it's good for everything else that's going on around here. So, look, there's lots of legal things here. I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on TV, but there seems to be a lot of things that sort of stretch to the very limits of what is reasonable and for the various assumptions to go forward with a project of this magnitude. And so as a group that's tasked with that responsibility, just as somebody who has a big investment in the area, I would ask you, please take your time and make a thoughtful decision. If you need to delay it or if you need to deny it, that's appropriate. But I'm just telling you, there's some serious concerns about this sort of thing, and we just want to express our opinion on that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Burden. The last person that I have signed up to speak on this agenda item is Alejandra Alvarado. Okay. Well, I was going to go because there are a couple of people that signed up and said, yes, they want to speak, but they didn't identify what they wanted to speak on. Where was she? Oh, okay. Yep. You identified number one, and it's number two, but Ms. Robert.
Good evening. I'm Allison Roberts. I'm the association president and representative of Dana Shores. We're a waterfront community that Mr. Hay referred to. Dana Shores was specifically referenced as well in the applicant file, and we were developed in the 1950s. I'm also here on behalf of Pelican Island Property Owners Association this evening, which collectively I represent over 400 homes and the associated homeowners. Changes to the waters surrounding Rocky Point obviously affect our residents and homeowners. If this development that's being proposed were appropriately zoned in uplands, we would not be here objecting this evening. But to suggest it's appropriate in 2018 to designate submerged lands marked by X over here on the slide for development concerns us deeply in a few ways and fails to recognize, I believe, two broader points. First, the precedent set by permitting development on totally submerged lands. And second, the conversion of navigable waters to private development. I know they were referred to as non-navigable. The last I checked, navigable waters are simply those with ebb and flow, which we surely have in that basin. Few things about that basin. It is a manatee protection zone by FWC on their charts. It may have seagrass in a few years. Right now, it's being considered as is. There is currently a $10 million project immediately west of this development or proposed development where a 230-foot span is being put in the Courtney Campbell Causeway using public funds specifically to enhance public waterways for the purpose of developing seagrass. Multiple court cases confirm the inalienable rights of the public to use these navigable waterways, those with ebb and flow, for all legitimate purposes, including travel, transportation, and pleasure. So if this council is to start picking and choosing which and when of these rights we protect, again, the question is, where does it stop? Ironically, the same group that's depending on you to alienate the public's right for their private development will find themselves dependent on you to ensure protection of the submerged lands that are in red here, which have an R60 zoning and would prohibit any movement of water or movement of boats in and out of their development were it to be developed. And I dare say that just south of their development again with the X, so south of that are three property owners with an estimated value of $100 million portfolio that I expect their submerged lands, I expect that they think their submerged lands will remain submerged lands, and that you will fully protect, again, the public's right and interest in transportation, pleasure, and navigation. And there are many more examples of such, and I ask that you consider that all the way to Bayshore Boulevard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robert. I have two other people that are signed up that did not put an agenda item down. So, an Eric Lee Sr. and a Martin, and I can't tell you, Largo, P.O. Box Largo.
Good afternoon, Martin Rosado, P.O. Box 348, Largo, Florida. Just a couple of things. I came in here by accident for some other reason. I was involved with something else here. But I'd just like to say to you, years ago I went to architect by the name of Guy Butler. He's pretty famous. He's done stuff all over the world. I went into his main conference room for the first time, and all over the walls, all these fabulous projects. And I looked at him, and I've been around Florida a long time. And I said to him, how many of those are in the United States? He says, not one of them. And I said, what sense does it make to have people go out of the country to spend their money because they can't see what they want to see here? So that's my first thing. The second thing I would say, and it's always found kind of funny, and I mean it very respectfully, the most sought after land anywhere in the state of Florida is on Star Island, which is an island that was filled in water. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Questions from commissioners? I can do that just to make sure. Is there anyone else in the audience who did not sign the sign-in sheet in the back that wishes to address the commission on this issue? Seeing none. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Metzger.
Yeah, thank you. Question for Mr. Hay. There was a lot of talk about the precedent that this might set. I was hoping you could provide a little bit more clarity on what exactly that would be. I was interested in some of the pictures that were shown in Jennifer, I believe's presentation. Allison, I'm sorry. I just took a shot. I thought I had it. Because I was wondering throughout the different presentations if there were other sites that were similar, if this was kind of a standalone, hey, I wonder why this line is going up here. It happens to be over the water. Let's do something about it.
Well, during staff's long review, this has been going on for months now, long review, we've identified that that it's when you have land use and water, the plan is a little inconsistent with itself because there are natural occurring water bodies that have properties in them that there's land use in, designated currently, and then there's other areas that are natural occurring water bodies that don't have land use in it. But it's my understanding that all the property within the boundaries of the city of Tampa do have zoning, whether it's water or not. So, but we've got some examples of land use and water and stuff like that. So precedent setting, it's kind of vague, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. Can I follow up quickly? So, and that's the situation that this one is in, is that the water area has a zoning, but it doesn't have a land use?
Correct.
And that situation is present all throughout?
All within the city of Tampa, all properties are zoned, whether they're underwater or not, publicly owned or privately owned.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Joseph.
Yes, I had a question, and really it's a concern. It's kind of different from what most of us have talked about tonight. We've given a lot of attention to the seagrass and natural habitats and species and kind of glazed over whether or not this piece of land can be considered a wetland. Staff's opinion was that it wasn't a wetland, and I'd like to understand what the definition of a wetland is by comprehensive planning standards to understand if this land is or may have areas of wetland located in it, because I think that's going to kind of change some of the policies and objectives that are applicable to the area.
I'm going to let Sean answer that question.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sean College, Planning Commission staff, Environmental Planning Team Leader. In our review of this property, we have visited the site. Absent a true environmental review, which has not taken place yet by the Environmental Protection Commission, but it's staff's opinion and looking at the site that the majority of the site would be considered open water, but there is likely a wetland fringe in certain areas around the edge of the basin where the water meets the seawall. It varies because there are varying depths where the water meets the seawall. The entire area does have a seawall, but some areas there is visible wetland species in some areas around the basin.
Can I just add something? I would just add that the formal delineation of any wetland, that responsibility lies with the Environmental Protection Commission. Our staff can do an assessment of what they see, but they're not the ones who formally do that delineation, and that's something the applicant would be compelled to do later in their review process.
I acknowledge that, but given the fact that there could be wetlands, and if you look at the definition of a wetlands in the comprehensive plan for Tampa and for Hillsborough County, it says that inundated areas of land can be considered wetland, should be considered wetland. And given that, I think it is subject to some of these policies for protections of wetlands, policy 1.27, policy 1.215, Objective 1.3, Environmental Policy 1.3.1. I have a list of 5 objectives and 10 policies to deal with protecting our wetlands. I think we're making a serious precedent-setting movement here by just assuming there are no wetlands and changing the land use to residential. I don't know that that's necessarily been done before, that we've just jumped from there may be wetlands, forget about it, it's now residential. And that's a major concern for me in this. And I don't know that I can lend my support to it at this point in time because of that.
Sure, I think those are very valid concerns, and I don't think staff is saying that, in any application, there are many times that we receive comments similar to what we did from the Environmental Protection Commission, because we're at a point in the process that they have not delineated the wetlands. So they'll say there may be wetlands, they want to put the applicant on notice, they want to put us on notice, and nothing about our approval or disapproval alters whether or not somebody from EPC's standpoint is allowed to develop if it is deemed that it is a wetland. So even if they were to receive this land use designation, if EPC then came and designated it as a wetland, then they wouldn't get to develop that without proceeding through EPC's process. But certainly, I can see where those policies.
And in our limited purview, I can't assume what EPC is going to do later on. All I can do, we can do, is take the knowledge that we have now, which Mr. College just said there could be wetlands in the area, and make a decision based on that.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Correct.
Commissioner Joseph, if I could actually expand a little bit, and I'm not an ecological scientist, but I do this, that to simplify some things, EPC has 3 criteria to determine whether or not it's a wetland. Water. So we know it's got one of 3. Any 2 of the 3 normally results in a wetland. One's water, second is hydric soils, and the third is the wetland plant species. Okay, so we know we got water. We're not sure because it's a man-made system whether or not we have the hydric soils. Not sure. And if there's no seagrasses on the waterward side of the seawall, I would imagine that there may be some wetland species that are what the fringe that Sean was talking about would be just landward, I guess, of the seawall, or, well, within 5 feet, maybe either way, just as a ballpark deal as to where wetlands would be. I would say that as far as the Water Management District is concerned, it at least qualifies as another surface water, but they don't require mitigation for other surface waters like they would for a wetland. I'm just providing information, not an opinion one way or the other, if any of it helps you in any way.
Well, I'd like to clarify, because again, we come back to whether there's seagrass or whether it's man-made. I'm going to read to you the definition verbatim from the comprehensive plan. Wetlands, lands that are transitional between terrestrial upland and aquatic open water systems, where the water table is usually at or near the surface, or where the land is covered by shallow water, and such lands are predominantly characterized by hydrophytic vegetation, the presence of hydric soil, as you mentioned, as determined by the U.S. Soil and Conservation Service and other indicators of 57 Hillsborough County definitions, regular or periodic inundation shall be used as evidence of the presence of a wetland area. I mean, it doesn't say anything about seagrass. It doesn't say anything about whether or not it was natural or man-made. This is the definition by our own comprehensive county plan and by the City of Tampa plan.
And I mean, I think it said the same thing, the vegetation, the hydric soils, and water. So we don't have any proof one way or the other of whether the hydric soils are there or the vegetation is there, but we do know that the water is there. And like, I'm not providing an opinion, I'm just telling you.
And maybe I could try to clarify further. When Planning Commission staff wrote the report, investigated the site, it was our conclusion that there are likely wetlands located in parts of this basin. Typically, it's where it shallows up and the light can penetrate enough, so there's the possibility, but doesn't have to be present of vegetation, but there could be vegetation. Some of the areas where it gets deeper, that would be considered open water, and the depths are such that there couldn't be vegetation because light does not penetrate. So there is likely, and that was considered in the review of the site, there's likely the presence of some wetlands, mostly probably open water. However, in coming to our conclusion and our recommendation, it was determined that it's possible for this property to get this land use and still develop consistent with the policies that are in the comp plan. There are policies, and you correctly cite them, for the protection of wetlands, but it's our belief that it's possible for the land use that is being recommended to develop consistent with the policies that are in the plan.
And I want to add, too, and be clear that I'm not trying to prevent development. I think they have a right to. It's already zoned. My concern is the precedent that our board is setting as the future visionaries of the county to just make this presumption at this point in time and cause a change in the land use because of this presumption. I think that's a little bit far-reaching, so.
Commissioner Chris?
Sean, I think this question might be for you, but several months ago, I did see a presentation, and I think someone referenced it about FDOT is trying to improve the water quality, I think, just to the west of the site a little bit, and I wondered if that was considered, if that would also have impacts on the site we're talking about.
It's highly speculative at this point what impacts, and I'm familiar with the project, and that project is under construction now to enhance the flow. It was mentioned earlier by one of the speakers, to enhance the flow in the backwaters above Courtney Campbell Causeway. It's expected to improve the habitat north of the Courtney Campbell Causeway in this area. What's expected to occur, as I recall from the presentations, is some of the seagrasses. There are different types of seagrasses. Some provide better habitat quality than others, and some flourish in more well-flushed areas. And if this area were to be flushed better, we might have more of the preferred seagrasses in the area north of the Courtney Campbell Causeway. I don't know that we could speculate really on what that impact is going to be on this basin. This basin, as best as we can tell, without an environmental assessment, but we did go to the site, we do not see seagrasses, and based on the depths we see from aerials and from actually going to the site, we don't believe there are any seagrasses there present now, and it's really speculative to say whether there would be seagrass recruitment based on the depths in this area. All the other areas north of the Courtney Campbell Causeway that have seagrasses are much shallower in this basin.
Commissioner Dix?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions for Mr. Hay. One that came from the report, but one based on something you said a second ago that tweaked my interest when you said that there are submerged lands all throughout the county that may have some land use designations set on them. I'm just curious, would be some of those, for example, be in Hillsborough Bay?
No, some of our research showed there's some evidence of land uses within Hillsborough River, that there's some land uses within large natural occurring water bodies like lakes. We also looked at unincorporated Hillsborough County, Mira Bay, down near Apollo Beach. When you look at Apollo Beach, all the canals in Apollo Beach don't have land use, but the canals in Mira Bay that are privately owned do have a land use in the water. So there's this unclear of properties that there's some properties that do have land use that are privately owned. Most properties in the water are publicly owned, and I even researched back how did these private lands get in the water? And it goes back, we traced it back through a history. I found something, I think, on the Department of Environmental Protection's website about the history of the Board of Trustees for water, that when we became a state and in our 20s, in the 1920s, the thought process was different, that all development is good and we're going to sell any land we can, and Davis Islands and Harbor Island, they were all privately owned. And some of these decisions that we're having now are consequences from decisions made long before we were born. So I don't know if that answers your question.
And since we don't know all of those submerged lands, perhaps what we are attempting to do may cause a precedence for those potential unknown submerged lands.
It may, just like in the 1920s, their decisions caused a precedent that they didn't think of. But in our research, when we looked at it, we couldn't say there's no water in Hillsborough County or the city of Tampa with a land use. So we can't, staff felt that we could not pick winners and losers based on, hey, we think you should have a land use, and you shouldn't have a land use. There's no policy direction that clearly states in the comp plan that water should not have a land use that we could find.
I have a concern on that, but let me ask you what I originally intended, is in the objections that were referred to by the city of Tampa, one of them was protect open space for its recreational safety, environmental value, and provide adequate parks and open space areas throughout the city. And the city of Tampa suggested that going through with this would be inconsistent with that land use objective. Y'all didn't seem to have a problem with that. And I'm wondering if the reason why you didn't seem to have a problem with it was that the public would still be able to use that park even though they would not have that waterfront view. However, it also brings up the notion of, as I look through this 175-page report, that the ingress and egress to the property that is projected to be filled would come through a platted lot, number 29, of which that park is comprised of. So while, if we allow it to go through, we're taking away the waterfront view of the park, but we're also reducing the size of the park by about 25%. Is that not a concern of yours to say that it might be inconsistent with our overall plan?
When staff looked at those policies, the majority of those deal with publicly owned parks. The unique situation is this is not a publicly owned park. People have had access to it, but it's not a publicly owned park. So we were not in agreement with city staff based on those policies because the objective clearly says public.
But it's not owned by the applicant either, is it?
Correct. It's not owned by the applicant. It's owned by a separate group.
Entity of that park, who hasn't necessarily given over the use of that property.
Well, they have an agreement that they provided to you in the back of as part of the packet.
Lot 29.
They've worked out that agreement to provide access as long as it's capped at 16 dwelling units.
And then lastly, I want to ask you how that might square with the new proposal, or the new, actually it was signed by the governor, the new law on riparian rights and public's common use of private properties, and if there's been an extended common use for some period of time, that the public would continue to have the riparian rights to that property.
Yeah, we as staff, we did not look at that. We looked at the policy direction in the plan. That's something that was not, we felt, under our purview. But any development would have to comply with state law.
Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Marino.
Thank you. David, I really enjoyed the historic maps. So my question is based on that. We keep talking about a man-made basin, but going back to that 1921 map, it appears as if this is the same basin. I know maybe the scale has changed in the maps, but it seems as if a lot of that basin was existing in 1921. So this 8.8 acres, are the 3 acres being considered tonight the man-made part of the basin?
Well, I think that's unclear. When we looked at it and did our historical analysis, you can see that, it was really a peninsula and not just this island, and so there's been so many changes out there that it would be hard to tell, because especially with the 21 map, you can tell it was hand-drawn, and who knows whether it was accurate or not. But, when staff looks at it, the whole Rocky Point has been greatly altered. You can see that none of where these apartments or the Doubletree or any of these office buildings, I think it was in the 50s, a lot of it was just mangroves and swamp land, basically, based on that map. So there may be portions of it that were not man-made, but it's been so greatly altered with the land around it, and that obviously activity must have occurred in the basin since so much was occurring on all the land surrounding it. So.
Just one more. So I guess the existing, if as far as you can go back, like I said, this may be a hand-drawn map, this original map. Does that precedent the fact that there appears to be some sort of some sort of basin going back that far, and the 1956 maps and 1969 maps and going to 89 seem to indicate some sort of body of water which is relatively similar? How is it then, if that was existing water, that it could have been privately owned if it existed for almost 100 years prior?
Well, again, it goes back to that wonderful board of trustees that made all these decisions for up until about the 60s. They just sold off. If someone could show they could bring investment to Florida, they, overall, this is just an overall history, not specific for, but if they could show, development potential, the board of trustees was like, here's the land, go for it. I mean, it was a Wild West day back then, I think, probably. But so it's a unique situation. There's privately owned property out there, and that's the tough one.
Commissioner Joseph.
I got one more quick question for Mr. College, if he's still in the room. Are there, sir, or could there be mangrove species within this site? Mangrove plant species?
Yes.
Is a mangrove plant species a hydrophytic plant species?
It is a wetland species, correct.
So we have inundations, and we have the possibility of a wetland plant species. 2 out of our chairs 3.
Yes, sir.
That was my only question.
I made a mistake, and I needed to offer the applicant a 3-minute period for rebuttal. So I want to try to correct that error and see if the applicant wants to spend 3 minutes rebutting anything that's was done in public comment.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I could not hear your comment.
I said I made a mistake and I neglected to ask for rebuttal.
We were
or to
waiting
offer
patiently.
rebuttal, so I am offering your 3 minutes
We
of
knew you were going to get
rebuttal.
around to us, Mr. Chairman. Nothing personal.
It's 3 minutes.
3 minutes, let me be very brief. I find it most interesting, again, Michael Horner for the record, that the very parties that are objecting to the filling of this basin are the very parties that have benefited from the filling of wetlands. We have the entitlements and the rights. There are no riparian rights for any of the abutting properties. No view lines. That's why there's no docks. We have no development rights allowed for any of those other properties. That's why my client paid for this property by deed, closed. No riparian rights, zero. The DoubleTree, that the gentleman noticed and represented, I think he took off, is located here. That is partially blocked by the old Highwood Center and the parking garage. We are talking about way down here. My client could sever the access to this man-made basin. So if they paid extra, they paid for all the wrong reasons, because on every one of these recorded deeds states no riparian water rights. Not views, not development, not docks. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves on the environmental issues. We have an EPC comment in the record. They have reviewed this. They have no objections. We have to go through that process. Not one spadeful of dirt gets filled into this basin until we go through all of EPC, SWIFMUD, DEP. If they come back and they say it's all wetlands and it's mangrove systems and we dismiss it the first go-around, then we're not developing. But that should not preclude an appropriate finding of fact that Res 35 is a very compatible and consistent plan sector designation. Mr. McElhaney is representing Weston. We're doing 3.5-story townhomes. Their parking garage is 5 stories up. We will be blocking none of those units. Even if they had riparian rights, we'll be blocking none of that water view. On the fill issues, that fill is going to be adjacent to Scarborough Park. Scarborough Park is a private park. The sole controlling entity of Scarborough Park is the Property Owner Association. They are the sole entity that negotiated with us and said, we will allow you one driveway, we will allow you 16 townhomes, and that's it. Scarborough Park remains intact. Again, this is our proposed site, the limited fill area. All of Scarborough Park remains. We have one driveway that they allowed, no more, no less, but no more. And we have the opportunity, and we have pledged and promised to improve the stormwater system and improve the park. So someone indicated, well, you're filling in Scarborough Park. No, we are the ones who are enhancing it because no other property owner enhanced stormwater management. That sheet flow comes right off North Rocky Point Drive, right into the basin. That's why it's not an environmentally sensitive basin. No pretreatment, no filtration. My client's the one that is doing that. We think it meets the criteria. We appreciate your support. Is 60 seconds for David Dickey, or is that the end of the rebuttal?
That's it.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Horner. I'm not seeing anybody else's red lights on. I guess I want to remind commissioners that what our purview really is. I can understand a lot of the comments and concerns. I mean, I have some of my own considering this. Sovereign submerged lands is the first thing that comes to my mind. I believe I have asked that of staff before and don't believe that it's sovereign submerged, it's private ownership. But I understand everybody else's concerns about the potential precedent, but in all honesty, I mean, you know, there's there's potential for wetlands on every property, and we're not the ones approving an engineering design or a construction plan like Mr. Horner said. Not a spadeful of dirt goes without all of many other agencies having a say. We're stuck to what's in our comp plan. And if there aren't any more questions, or you have, Commissioner Metzger, you have another question?
I did just have one more for Mr. Hay, just thinking about the purview that we have here. The plan that you presented to us, your recommendation, was based on if, setting aside what is potentially going to be done, if it was developed to its maximum potential, your finding is that it would be consistent with the plan, even if it was developed maximum.
Correct.
level.
Yes. Due to the surrounding community mixed-use 35 that offers a 2.0 FAR, and this is limited to a 0.6, and it has the same density as surrounding property, that's CMU 35 dwelling units per acre. This also has 35 dwelling units per acre. So it's actually when we looked at just the land use portion, we talked about the potential of CMU 35 when it first came in, because everything around it is CMU 35. Mm-hmm. And working with the applicant, we said due to the zoning, the residential 35 is the lowest zoning district that would permit the RM24 zoning district. So we brought it down just to the category that matches the zoning.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to get that clarification because there's been a lot of talk, and I appreciate all of the work that the applicant did with the community, but I try to focus myself on the task at hand here because there's a lot of very important things to consider. But thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Metzger. I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to move that we find CPA 17-10 consistent with the Imagine 2040 Tampa Comprehensive Plan and forward to the Tampa City Council.
Have a motion by Commissioner Buzza and a second by Commissioner Metzger. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Those opposed? Let's do a show of hands. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the motion carries 6 members, Commissioners Dix, Marino, and Joseph against. Thank you. Before we move on, I have some people that have signed up. I have names on this, on my sign-in sheets that have signed up to speak on agenda item number 9. And if you weren't here when we started this meeting, agenda item number 9, TACPA 1805, was continued to next month's meeting, just so you know. Brings us to item number 3, TACPA 17-18A, future land use map amendment. Ms. Malone.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jennifer Malone, your Planning Commission staff. On these next 2 items, Planning Commission staff is requesting that they are opened together and that I do both presentations back to back so that the board may see both of these in their totality, and it gives a very holistic picture of these 2 amendments, but then there would be 2 separate actions at the end of both of my presentations.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Malone. I was, just for the Commissioner's reference, I was informed that this is preferable so that you get a bigger picture. Otherwise, you might be confused on the first one. So please proceed.
Thank you so much. Okay, the first is 1718A. It is located in the University Planning District within the Lowry Park Central neighborhood. This 1718A is privately initiated. This one is a small scale amendment at about 0.15 acres, and the request is to go from residential 10 to residential 20. This is the subject site with the red balloon. It's a pretty heavy tree canopy in this area, but this is about where it is, 8714 North Tampa Street. I have North Tampa Street, West Yukon Street to the south, West Humphrey Street to the north. This is off of North Florida Avenue. There's a Home Depot and a Dollar Tree, and then Bush Boulevard is just out of frame, but it's to the north of the subject site. I have some site pictures. This is the subject site. And then the rest of my pictures are of the surrounding area. This is at the corner of North Tampa Street and West Humphrey Street, so to the north of the of the subject site right here. So this picture's to the north of that. And then I have another view. This is part of the same development as the last photo, just a different angle. And this is just a vacant lot that's present along North Tampa Street and the surrounding development. This is the adopted future land use map. The request, the subject site is residential 10, right across the street. This is residential 20. The red is community commercial 35. That allows for commercial intensive uses. It's present along North Florida Avenue. And then the pink is community mixed use 35. That's where that Home Depot and the Dollar General were before. And then we have East Bush Boulevard to the north. The proposal before you today would be to change this subject site to residential 20, and I'm going to zoom in on my next slide, and it's the brown, which is the same color that's across the street that has that interface. The impacts under the currently adopted future land use category, the existing density is 1 dwelling unit. If approved, this would increase to 3, and the floor area ratio would increase as well, but the locational criteria would still need to be met per our comprehensive plan to utilize the increase of the floor area ratio. The subject site is located 1 block west of North Florida Avenue, which staff reviewed. That's a transit emphasis corridor per our comprehensive plan and a mixed-use corridor with a variety of commercial uses. The proposed change would provide a logical transition in density from the intensive commercial land uses along North Florida Avenue to the single-family detached neighborhood further west, and that also ties back to several policies that we have about that sensitive transition in density within the comprehensive plan. The proposed change would also maximize the use of infrastructure, which is encouraged by the comprehensive plan as well. And we also found that this was consistent with policies related to providing varied housing options for these citizens of Tampa to accommodate that growing population through the year 2040. So with that, we did find this proposed map amendment consistent. And I'm going to just jump right into 1718B, unless there's any questions anybody has about 1718A.
Just keep going.
I will continue. This is also located in the Lowry Park, in the University Planning District within the Lowry Park Central neighborhood. However, 1718B is a publicly initiated request. It is also a small-scale amendment at about 1.85 acres, but the request is from residential 10 to residential 20. It's the same request as 1718A, but this one is publicly initiated. The subject site is outlined in the yellow boxes. It is essentially the remaining block of North Tampa Street. 1718A is right here. Staff did find the opportunity to increase density on this portion of North Tampa Street and publicly initiated this request that is before you today. And we'll just go through some site pictures. This is on North Tampa Street. We're looking south towards Yukon. And we're moving south. This is a portion of the subject site, a residential detached family, single family home. And this is at the corner of Yukon and North Florida Avenue. And then we have a vacant lot on the left and then another single family detached home on the right. I have the adopted future land use map. The future land use is residential 10. The subject site is outlined with the black line. Then I have residential 20 to the across the street, community commercial 35 in the red, and the community mixed use 35 in the pink. This is the proposed, and then I'll zoom in on the next slide. And the sliver of orange, that is the 1718A subject site. And once again, there's residential 20 directly across the street from the subject sites and also to the south. So we have the interface, and it's also present further to the south. The density would increase. Currently, these under the acreage with all the combined parcels, there is a potential for up to 18 dwelling units. If approved, this would increase to 37, and the floor area ratio would also increase, but the applicant would still have to meet that locational criteria outlined in the comprehensive plan to utilize. We also found this consistent for many of the same reasons that we found 1718A consistent. Staff did find that there was potential for redevelopment along the Florida Avenue corridor, and that this request would really help that sensitive transition of scale and sensitive transition of density from North Florida Avenue. as well as maximizing the use of existing infrastructure and consistently providing those varied housing options for Tampa's growing population. And with that, we found this consistent as well. I'm available for any questions. City of Tampa staff also found these consistent, but LaShawn is here to answer any questions on their finding.
Thank you, Ms. Malone. Is the applicant for A here, and do they wish to make a presentation?
The applicant is here. Would you like to make a presentation? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Cristina Mendoza Justiniano. I am the property owner of 8714 North Tampa Street. I purchased this property almost 2 years now, and I purchased it because when I looked up on it, it was a multifamily home. The seller did not disclose to me that he had lost its rights for abandoning the property. So I get this letter letting me know that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, so I'm here trying to fix the problem. I never thought that I had to check zoning, being that the home was built in 1938 in the front and the back one was 1948. The street has about 12 other properties under the same circumstances, so it never crossed my mind to check the zoning. I made this as an investment and also to put my kids through college, and I hope you guys take that in consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mendoza. Is there anyone in the public that wishes to address the commission on this item? I don't have anybody. Actually, I may. Joe Kozuski?
My name is Joe Golcheski, 15404 North 15th Street, Luce, Florida. I own property on Ashley, which is adjoining on the west side of that. What exactly are they wanting to do with all these other properties? You guys have better things to do than just arbitrarily go around and rezone areas for multifamily. Somebody else has got a plan. Now, I can see this young lady's point. You know, she was caught up in some sort of title mistake. But all the other properties, why would we want to have that kind of density in that area? The houses that are currently on those properties barely fit as it is. You have about a car width between each building, and you want to triple that density? That doesn't sound right. That's going to make that prime for transient housing in 1 month, out another, and that's not what you want to bring to your city of Tampa into that area. You know, I took a house that was dilapidated and made it a very nice home that I rent out to a family that's been there for several years. It's pride in the community. I don't want to see that neighborhood go down. It's a transitional neighborhood right now, and we'd really like to bring it up and not have homes packed on top of each other where they're moving in and out every month. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public that wishes to address the commission on this item? Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Joseph.
I just wanted to state, since I objected so vehemently to staff's position last time, that I agreed heartily with staff's position this time. I think this was a good catch and way to, you know, kind of blend density away from the main corridor and back into the residential areas. So I support both of these wholeheartedly.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Okay, so we need to take these things in order. I will entertain a motion on 17-18A. Oh, well, actually, I will close public comment and then entertain that motion.
I move that we, sorry, I'm getting my bearings here. Move that we find the proposed map amendment to be consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Imagine 2040 Tampa Comprehensive Plan.
Map amendment. Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Metzger and a second by Commissioner Joseph, and this is for CPA 17-18A, that it's found consistent. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously by members present. Okay. Yeah, but I can open it back up for the other one, if that's the case. I'm being told that it might not have been clear that public comment was for both 18A and 18B. So, is there anyone in the public who wishes to address 18B, since we've already voted on A? Seeing none, public comment is still closed. And I will entertain a motion on 17-18B. Thank you.
I would also move that we find 17-18B consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Imagine 2040 plan.
I have a motion by Commissioner Metzger and a second by Commissioner Thrower. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Those opposed. Motion carries unanimously by members present. Thank you. Mr. Hay, you're back. 1801.
Get rid of me.
Not yet.
Not yet. Next,
One can
for your
hope.
review is TACPA 1801. It's a proposed map amendment to the future land use map. And for the record, David Hay, Planning Commission staff. I don't know if I said that or not. Getting tired, maybe. The general location of this request, it is in the Central Tampa Planning District. It is also within the boundaries of the West Tampa Urban Village, which have specific policies within the comp plan regarding our urban villages. And then it also falls within the North Hyde Park neighborhood boundaries. Here we have an aerial. The subject site is marked by the star here. This is Cass. We have Willow. Of course, this is UT. We've got Julian B. Lane Park that just opened a few days ago. You can see the pattern. It's a mix of all different type uses within this area. We have industrial, light industrial uses scattered throughout the GMU 24. We have single-family detached residential located more to the north, but scattered through the area. There's commercial uses, office uses, and multifamily residential uses. Most of the multifamily is centered on Rome Avenue to the west. This is a privately initiated plan amendment. It is small scale. It's approximately 1.93 acres in size. Currently, it has that general mixed use 24, and the applicant is seeking to go to that community mixed use 35 future land use category. We'll go on a little tour of this around the subject site. Here we're looking southeast toward the subject site from the corner of West Cass and North Willow. This is the subject site here, and then you can see this is Willow going down. You can see there's office buildings and some light industrial uses. Here we're on North Willow, looking northwest across a portion of the subject site. This is the subject site running all the way down here. So we've got the parking in the building, and this is Cass Street, right over here. Here now we're down Carmen Street, looking east. So this is the subject site. You're looking toward downtown and Willow. This is Willow in the distance. So again, some non-residential development around. We move up to West Cass Street. Again, the subject site is right here on the right. Of course, we're looking west toward downtown. And you can see some of the residential units have been converted into office type uses on the north side. Then now we're looking southeast. We're standing in front of the subject site, looking southeast down Willow. You could see the traditional industrial pattern. I guess that's what you could call it. And then here we're on Cass Street, looking southwest across the back of the subject site. So the building that you saw that's in the front is over here, and then we're looking toward the southwest. And Carmen Street is down behind these trees down there. Here we have the adopted future land use map. It depends on what monitor you have, but this light blue color is all the general mixed use 24. That is kind of a unique category in the city because it allows residential, commercial, and industrial uses. That's usually you try to separate the industrial uses from the residential, but the general mixed use 24 was placed in the city's older areas where it had a very eclectic mix of uses. You can see the community mixed use 35, a number of these have had plan amendments within the last 10 years to that community mixed use 35. A lot of that, like the West End type development, there's been a lot of multifamily built on this, again, centered over toward Rome Avenue. And then you can see how it transitions north of Cass Street. The general mixed use 24 stops, and then you go into the residential 35, and then down to the residential 20. And there's some remaining residential 20 scattered throughout. We saw that on the aerial. There's some single family detached remaining to the south. The applicant is seeking a change to that community mixed use, to the community mixed use 35. So you can see the site has morphed into that pinkish color representing that CMU 35 category. Let's go over the impacts. The existing 46 dwelling units can be considered on the subject site. And again, it can go up to 125,994 square feet of non-residential uses. Under the community mixed use 35, the density and intensity does increase. It goes up to 67 dwelling units or up to 167,992 square feet of non-residential. If you remember, in the city's community mixed use category, if someone comes in and proposes a development, they can either use the floor area ratio or the unit count for residential. So you could actually have a development that potentially could have more than 67 dwelling units if they utilize the floor area ratio, and that is the city's attempt to encourage a more mixture of uses in these areas. The other impact would be that it does eliminate the possibility of industrial general, that IG zoning, and the commercial intensive, the CI zoning districts. The applicant, once it changes, could not rezone to one of those two categories, and those uses would be eliminated. The Planning Commission staff reviewed the comprehensive plan and found the proposed request for community mixed use 35 would be consistent with the adopted policy guidance within the comprehensive plan. We found, I think, three areas of general consistency. The first deals with just the general promotion of infill within appropriate areas, sites like that are maybe underutilized or vacant. Like, for instance, this site with its development, I believe, is at a 0.16 floor area ratio. So under even the general mixed use 24, you could do a 1.5. So you can see how it's not being utilized to its full potential based on its square footage. Also, we found that it's consistent with numerous policies that talk about promoting multifamily and higher density residential in appropriate areas where there's existing multifamily residential and where there's other services, commercial, transit, and recreation, since this is right near the Julian B. Lane Riverfront Park. So we did find it consistent with a number of those policies. And finally, our comp plan for the city does promote a mixture of uses. We're always wanting that in again, appropriate areas, that mixture of uses where maybe residential is on top and the commercial services are at the bottom. So maybe someday everyone doesn't have to drive everywhere. But specifically, I want to call out a land use policy 3.5.2. It's came out of the Center City study, and it was put into the plan under the most recent update. It's that policy 3.5.2 specifically calls for this area of the city to transform into a new mixed-use residential community. That CMU 35 category furthers that policy direction. So, not surprisingly, your staff is recommending to you this evening that that TA CPA 1801 be found consistent with the Imagine 2040 Tampa Comprehensive Plan. And that concludes my presentation. I think the city's here. I don't know if they're available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hay. Is the applicant here, and do they wish to make a presentation?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and Ms. Zornita. My name is John Grandoff. I practice at the Hill, Ward, and Henderson firm in Tampa. My address is Suite 3700 Bank of America Plaza. And I have the pleasure of representing ABC Capital, which has proposed this plan amendment before you this evening. First, I want to acknowledge the extensive input and assistance that Mr. Hay and Ms. Malone provided to us in several meetings regarding this property. It was very welcomed and encouraging. And I'll summarize my comments by telling you that the GMU 24 category is kind of a grab bag category where a property doesn't know exactly where it's going. And if you read the definition, it's kind of, we don't know what to put on this, but we put a GMU 24 until the market comes to that property. And you're seeing this happen in Ybor City and now in West Tampa. And as David wrote in his findings, this area of the city is a prime area for redevelopment due to its large lot pattern and dated industrial buildings. So you typically have this in a transitional industrial area. He also finds that the policy 3.5.2 encourages a, quote, vibrant urban lifestyle through mixed-use development. And I think this is clearly enunciated by the recent development of the Julian Lane Park and the other projects that are starting to take place and take shape north of Kennedy Boulevard. If you'll focus for a moment, the location of this property is on Cass Street and Willow, a major thoroughfare, probably a secondary thoroughfare after Kennedy Boulevard into downtown Tampa. I will close by noting that his findings find that the current structure was built in 1949 at a .13 FAR, which clearly shows that this property is underutilized. In order to efficiently use municipal resources, I submit to you that the plan amendment to CMU 35 is justified and request your approval this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It appears that I have several people signed up to speak on this item. Bobby Royal. No, I have a couple, but I'm going to take you in order. So, actually, I'd like to go in order of what I've got. I apologize for that, but you're the first name I've got. So,
my name is Bobby Royal. The building is 518 North Willow. I'm not too well versed. Excuse me, I'm sorry, Honorable Commissioner as well as Commissioner Chair. I'm not too well versed as far as the zoning and what have you. But what I do know, I've been there for a while. And the thing about that community, it's a community that sticks together. And we're trying not to become a community like the other ones that just doesn't care. We care about what goes on in our community. You know, and as far as, you know, they're saying put up this and put up that, I can understand progress, but when progress, you know, hampers the ability of those that are around you, that's not progress. You know, there's an old saying, Commissioner, that if it's not broke, don't fix it. Or if it's, you know what I'm saying, right? So that being said, I urge you to reconsider and maybe let the city as well as yourself sit down and take a generalized look at that area before you say, well, hey, I'm going to go ahead and pass this. And that's basically all I'm saying, sir.
thank you, Mr. Royal.
I'll yield.
I have, is it Harriet McCrae?
Okay, before we have to pass some documents out that you have to look at before I speak. Something may have to share. I didn't know the board was this big. I miscalculated, so I do apologize for the shortage of the information.
You need to make sure the clerk gets one. The gentleman on the end.
Good evening. Thank you for letting us speak. My name is Harriet McCrae. I'm here representing the West Riverfront Neighborhood Association that this property, project lies within. I want to give a short history in regards to the area. The West Tampa community was approached about 10 years ago by the city of Tampa to create an overlay. Their thought was to create the overlay for the community. The community response was, we'll do it ourselves. So we did for 2 years. I was one of the members as well as Ms. Jones. For 2 years, we worked and we created the document that you see there before you. It was finally passed not only by the body of the commission, because we went back and forth, and also with the city council. It was created to keep the characteristic, one part of it was created to characteristics of the neighborhood. It says that on the first part of that document, 27-231C. That's one of the things that we've been fighting, to keep the characteristic of the neighborhood. This encroachment that you're saying about the 35 CMU is not going to do that. Once you let that precedence go ahead, it's going to take the rest of the characteristic of the community away. So 24 needs to remain like that. It was also mentioned about Ybor City. One thing about Ybor City is this, and it's the truth, and you all do know it, is that anything that goes in that community does not go with the characteristics with the design, architectural design of that community will not stand. You remember a few years ago, ACC built a building too high? Guess who brought it back down to where it's supposed to be? The people who have the same type of overlay that we have. West Tampa is also a local historic area. We didn't go to the national because it was a little bit too encumbersome, so we have the local historic area for the West Tampa, which also is the same size as the West Tampa overlay. Many of the people who live in the community were also the people who also unite. You know that beautiful part that y'all see right there? They also were there to input to have that part designed in the way that the community wished for it designed. They went to all the meetings. They met all the architectures to be able to have that wants and need for the community for the park to be utilized and designed. We also were involved in the West Tampa Comprehensive Plan. The West Tampa Comprehensive Plan is part of the Tampa Comprehensive Plan. And we are very involved in what's going on in our neighborhood. The community do not want any more encroachment of a density like that. We prefer something where we have single dwelling, single family housing, where, just like a garage, a carport, whatever it may be. But this beehiving is enough, because it does take away from the characteristic of, we already have it on Rome Avenue, and those areas that he was speaking about in the pink where it says 35, most of that is existing areas that's going to be replaced with the same type of construction that was already there in the first place. But what we have now needs to remain like it is, historical, accurate, and characteristic of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McCray. I have Delphine Jones.
Good afternoon. I'm Delphine Jones. I reside at 1518 West LaSalle Street. I'm the Vice President of West Riverfront Crime Watch Group, which our Crime Watch Group is named after Julian B. Lane came after, but our neighborhood's named after that. So like she said, and I agree with Harriet, we have done all the work that we needed to do to sustain our neighborhood. At this point, it's become very dangerous. We have transportation scheduled to come to our meetings because you can't even cross the street because it's so impacted with apartments here, apartments there. I haven't had peace in my neighborhood in 15 years. It's one project to the other, one project to the next project. We want to keep our neighborhood, like she said, single homes with garage attachment. We're considered a walk-in neighborhood, and that's what we want to keep it. And keep some of these apartments out. It's enough apartments in that area. It's beginning to be where I can't even come off my street unless I get halfway in the street. So that means I'm practically trying to dash across the street is like suicide. They've had a couple of accidents and everything. That's why we're having transportation out. So I'd like to see the neighborhood maintain like it is, decrease some of the population. Plus we have the UT students. That's another trouble area in itself. We've constantly got to be behind what's going on with parties, this and that. Kids not understanding that this is my home. And this is, you go to school, you go there and then you leave. Maybe you stay in the community, but you don't care about the community. And business is the same thing. Everybody wants to come in and do their thing and leave, and no consideration for the people who built the area and cared for the area all these years.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. I don't have anybody else signed up to speak for this item, but is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the commission on this agenda item? Are there any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Metzger. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. Before I go there, I'm not having good luck today, let's put it that way.
Quite all right.
3 minutes for rebuttal.
I'll take less than that. Our client will comply with the West Tampa Overlay District that these women had some influence on, and we would appreciate the opportunity to meet with them to discuss the project at their convenience. If they'd like to visit, they would like to visit with me outside the chamber, I'd be glad to give them my card and we can talk to them about the project. I request your approval. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Questions from commissioners. Commissioner Metzger.
I'm so
I
reliable.
think it's safe.
Aren't I? I had a question for Mr. Hay, just about the overlay district. I was wanted to verify that that was something, or ask if that was something that was taken into consideration.
Well, the overlay is contained in the Land Development Code. It's not a comp plan issue. We looked at the policy direction regarding West Tampa, and the policy direction, especially that 352, talks about more of a multifamily development pattern that's appropriate. When they go in for permitting, that's when the overlay will come into play, and they'll have to meet all the requirements of the city's overlay standards.
Okay, thank you. That was my question, was whether or not they would be required to comply with the standards that they've worked very hard to set up.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? With that, public comment will be closed, and I'll entertain a motion.
I don't have the number in front of me.
1801.
1801. And just say that I appreciate the members of the community coming out and speaking out on this issue. Thank you. Thank you very much. To me, the requirement that they comply with the overlay district personally satisfies my concern on that front. So I would move that we find 1801 consistent with the Imagine 2040 Tampa Comprehensive Plan.
Have a motion by Commissioner Metzger and a second by Commissioner Wilds. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously by members present. Brings us to item number 6, TACPA 1802.
Again, David Hay with your Comprehensive Planning and Policy Review Team. The next amendment for your review is TACPA 1802. It is a small-scale amendment. It's in the University Planning District, also within the Lowry Park Central neighborhood. You'll see as we zoom in, it's just north of the Hillsborough River, right along Florida Avenue. And here we go. Here's the aerial. You could see this is North Florida. This is River Park with the tower that we all see on the interstate. You can't really see it really well here, but it is on there. And then this, of course, is the Hillsborough River. You've got North River Shore Drive. And then we all know the huge parking lot associated with the Kmart and all that fun stuff up there. It goes into a much more intensive land use category to the north. And then you've actually got multifamily residential to the west. It is a privately initiated small scale. It's part of a larger parcel, but the portion that they're seeking is 0.35 acres. currently is designated that residential 35, and they're looking to go to the urban mixed use 60 future land use category. We'll take a quick tour of the subject site. This is where north of the subject site, looking into the back of the subject site. Florida Avenue is beyond these buildings here, so this portion in the front here is the UMU 60, and they're looking at this portion to, go from the R35 to the UMU 60 on this back piece. Whoops. Here we're looking at the back of the, was a former restaurant. I don't think it's still in business, but, and then the subject site is here in the back. It's the parking lot associated with the restaurant, the former restaurant use. Here's the back of the parking lot. And then here's the multifamily that's adjacent to it. And then the Hillsborough River is down there by the trees. And here's the front. It was a restaurant. Okay, on to the currently adopted future land use map. It's hard to see, but this is all one parcel. And you could see the front is that UMU 60. That's where that big parking lot was. And then, of course, immediately to the west is that R35, where you saw that multifamily. And then it's hard to see, but the south side of River Shore Drive, the UMU 60 goes all on that parcel there. And that they're seeking this to go to the UMU 60 as well. Again, it goes across the bridge going south. It goes into that community commercial 35. And then the residential along the river is all planned at residential 10. There's some community mixed use 35 here just to the south. And then recreation open space where the park's at. And if this amendment is approved, the back part where that parking lot is goes to that UMU 60 future land use category. The impacts of that change on that back piece, currently under that R35, 12 units or a total of 9,147 square feet could be considered on the back. Under the potential UMU 60, it could go up to 21 dwelling units or a maximum of 49,549 square feet. The basic impact is that we're intensifying that back part of that parcel. Staff found 2 areas of consistency with the comprehensive plan. Policy direction regarding promotion of our mixed-use areas and to accommodate those mixed-use areas in areas that where transit and employment and entertainment uses are present. It was consistent with that. And our basic infill policies that also promote, in areas, again, where there's transit and things like that. So based on that, Planning Commission staff recommends that the 1802, I'm losing track of all my plan amendments here, be found consistent with the Imagine 2040 Tampa Comprehensive Plan. That concludes my presentation. I don't know if this...
Thank you, Mr. Hay. Is the applicant here, and do they wish to make a presentation?
Oh, yeah.
It's Andrew Mathers. Very nice to meet you guys. 8100 North Florida Avenue is the property right across the street. We're the owners of that. We have a boat repair business that we're expanding. We start selling boats now, so we acquired the property in order to expand our business across the street. We're going to leave it as it is, except for we're going to, instead of having cars going to a restaurant, we're going to have boats for sale on it. We'll fence it off. We're going to landscape it beautifully, and hopefully it'll improve the area because it's been abandoned for quite some time prior to us buying it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't have anybody signed up, but is there anyone in the public who wishes to address the commission on this agenda item? Seeing none, there's no need for rebuttal. Are there any questions from commissioners? No? Okay. So then public comment will be closed, and I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we find the land use change for residential 35 to urban mixed use 60 for Tampa Plan Amendment TA CPA 1802, consistent with the Imagine 2040 plan, Tampa Comprehensive Plan, and forward this recommendation to Tampa City Council.
Second. We have a motion by Commissioner Marino and a second by Commissioner Buzza. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries unanimously by members present. Several more to go. TA CPA 1803, Future Land Use Text Amendment. Mr. Hay,
Back
fancy
again.
meeting you here.
Back again. Good evening, Commissioners. David Hay again with your Planning Commission staff. The next amendment for your review is actually a text amendment to the comprehensive plan. It's Text Amendment 1803. A little background, it is privately initiated. It removes language referencing the Community Mixed Use 35 future land use category and provides language referencing any future land use category that allows for residential development on Rattlesnake Point. This keeps coming back. The other two changes, it basically ensures any proposed residential development that is located in proximity to heavy industrial uses on Rattlesnake Point demonstrates through design and accepted practices that residents would not be at risk. And then it also provides other corrections, spelling corrections, and clarifies existing policy language. There is, when staff received the request, since it is privately initiated, we review it and see if it will cause any unintended consequences. So we try to at least, and when staff looked at this, we looked at, with the removal of the referencing the Community Mixed Use 35, we're all familiar with Rattlesnake Point. It's that peninsula with the mix of CMU and heavy industrial. The policy language currently clearly restricts it to the parcels that are CMU 35. Well, when the applicant is seeking to remove that, that could be a good thing, because if there's any future amendments like to UMU 60, the current language wouldn't cover it. So staff looked at exempting areas that were previously approved for UMU 60, AKA the West Shore Marina project, which is located from West Shore about 1,300 feet or greater, if the applicant, from West Shore, and it touches on the north side of Tyson. Well, we wanted to ensure that that process is continued, that under the change a future interpretation wouldn't say, well, now the West Shore Marina has to meet it, because it's at UMU 60. So staff's recommendation to you is to include a distance from West Shore Boulevard. And when we measured it from West Shore 1,300 feet. And if you remember, and of course I'm forgetting the plan amendment, but there was a small piece that was recently amended, I believe about 2 years ago, year and a half ago. It went from heavy industrial to community mixed use 35. There were two that evening. There was a small one and a large one. This is a small one. And we have always looked at that piece, and even when we presented our report to you, it was presented as the rattlesnake policies apply just to that small segment. So then when we looked at this, we wanted to make sure we exempted them out. We recommended the 1,300 feet. I believe the property owner for that small piece is not in agreement with us, and they'll be making probably a presentation to you all for some alternative language. But that's how we got to recommending to you the additional change to that text amendment. We did find that overall, with the inclusion of our proposed language, that the proposed text is consistent with a number of comprehensive plan policies. The comprehensive plan language recognizes the potential issues heavy industrial uses pose to residential uses and discourages the placement of locating residential uses within close proximity to heavy industrial uses. The comprehensive plan also promotes overall public safety and ensuring that any negative impacts associated with residential development are mitigated for in the development process. The proposed language provides for an appropriate framework for the transition, the continuing transition, of the Rattlesnake Point Peninsula from an industrial area to a more mixed-use development pattern, while also ensuring residential development is designed and prepared for any potential hazardous situation regarding the proximity of different uses. So based on that, your staff is recommending to you this evening that the proposed language, including our language in that, be found consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Imagine 2040 Tampa Comprehensive Plan. That concludes my presentation. I don't believe the city has any additional comments. We're here for any questions if you have them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hay. Does the applicant wish to make a presentation?
Good evening. Andrea Zellman with the law firm of Buchanan, Ingersoll, Rooney, 401 East Jackson Street, and I am representing the applicant, Gandy View Realty, which is the property owner, and they also operate chemical formulators, which since 1996 has operated on Rattlesnake Point, manufacturing bleach that's used for water treatment throughout the state of Florida. This is like that bad penny that keeps returning to you. I know you've heard about Rattlesnake Point before. In November of 2017, you heard from our client when they were there objecting to some other plan amendments. And as they told you, CFI provides an essential service to our state. It's the only plant of its type on the west coast of Florida. It provides 85% of the water treatment chemicals used on the west coast. It has contracts with cities and counties throughout Florida to keep the public water supply safe. And as I said, they've been on the point since 1996 when that area was marketed to industrial users, and they spent millions of dollars on their facility there. They have not been able to find another location in the city of Tampa that offers what Rattlesnake Point has, which is deep water access and rail access, which they use to bring in the products used in their processes. Now, just a very brief history. Back in 2006, 2007, after some plan amendments were applied for, there was a joint resolution where all the property owners, including my client, created comprehensive plan policies that envision the eventual transition of Rattlesnake Point from heavy industrial to mixed use. But the key words there are eventual and transition. There was always the understanding, and in fact, the language adopted in 2007 had the express requirement that no residential uses could happen before the heavy industrial uses were gone. The city was also supposed to develop some sort of transition plan, but that never happened. In 2016, a property owner on Rattlesnake Point brought before you a text amendment and before the city that basically changed the comp plan policies to make it easier for properties on the point to develop residential uses there. And both you and the city staff opposed that change, but it was approved by the city council. We were not involved in that process. And we think that with those changes, some important factors were overlooked. It had language that only applied to properties that abutted heavy industrial uses, and that doesn't make sense in light of the dangers that are posed by a chemical leak. It only applied to CMU 35 properties, and we just felt that the language had been watered down to the point of being ineffective. And as we said, or actually Rhea Law from my office said when she was before you in November objecting to 2 plan amendments, we're not necessarily trying to stop all map amendments on Rattlesnake Point or even all plan development on Rattlesnake Point. We just wanted to put brakes on until these comp plan policies were cleaned up to provide better protections to allow this orderly transition, because to do otherwise, frankly, puts future residents in a potentially dangerous situation as a result of my client and other heavy industrial users being on the point. So really the changes that we're proposing tonight are very, very simple. If you look at the draft language, again, we're removing, before it only referenced changes to the CMU 35 category, but as David pointed out, there are other comp plan policy categories that would allow residential uses. So we just changed the language to apply to any properties that had a comp plan or go to a comp plan designation that allows residential uses. We also took out the reference to abutting property owners. And the language that was added in 2016 said that anyone who abutted an industrial use had to demonstrate through design and accepted practices that the occupants of the new residential use wouldn't be unduly at risk. We just think that should apply to anyone on Rattlesnake Point that applies for a PD to allow for residential uses. And really, that's all that this plan amendment would do. Now, we have applied for a zoning code text amendment in order to further elaborate on what demonstrating through design and accepted practices means, but that's not before you tonight. That will not be before you for a while. This plan amendment is supported by city staff and by your staff, which found it to be consistent with a number of comprehensive plan policies. EPC submitted a letter to you also in support. We ask that you follow these recommendations and recommend approval. I'm glad to answer any questions, and I would like rebuttal time at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hillman, especially for the reminder about rebuttal times. I have several people signed up to address the commission on this item. I have Elise.
Mr. Chairman, there's a number of us that have a presentation, and it would make a lot of sense if we could go in a different order. Would that be permissible? It really will make more sense for you, and when it will go quicker.
So, if you're staying within the 3-minute things, can you tell me what the order is?
Yes, Dave yeah, Hillsborough.
Dave, in the interest of proceeding quicker.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Commission members, David Mechanic, 305 South Boulevard, Tampa, Florida. I'm here on behalf of Old Dutch Foods. We have organized this so that we would not be repeating each other's comments, so it should go more efficiently and be more coherent that way. Ms. Zellman gave you an overview. What I'd like to just open with is the fact that there are 7 plan amendments over a period of 11 years regarding Rattlesnake Point. What you need to understand is that every one of those plan amendments by the city that was ultimately approved by City Council adopted the concept of transitioning from industrial uses to residential and commercial uses. City Council made that decision, and we've debated these points at least seven times, because for every City Council plan amendment, there are probably 3 public hearings because of the transmittal and then first and second reading. So there have literally been about 21 hearings where we've debated these same points. What I'd like to emphasize, however, is the safeguards that Ms. Zellman are proposing to introduce through the Plan Amendment and Land Development Code were adopted specifically by City Council in 2016. Nobody has even had a chance to try out those policies. There's been no change of circumstance. There is no reason on earth why we need to change the comprehensive plan when the policies City Council adopted in 2016 haven't even had a chance to work yet. Nobody has said those policies don't work, just we should follow the decision made by City Council. I mean, I understand that you all make recommendations and you could have a different opinion, but City Council has acted with frustration because there are numerous times when the staff has come with objections to the transition from industrial to residential, and City Council people speak in frustration saying, we've told you we want this transition to happen, so please allow it to happen. And we are asking you to deny this plan amendment request for the same reason. The safeguards are in place. Allow the transition to happen as determined by City Council. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Kevin Minier with the Genesis Group, and I'd like to just spend a minute and discuss some other concerns we have with the proposed changes to the policies. I've also handed out a set of maps and a chart that hopefully also help to explain the situation. My first concern is the amendment affects every property owner on the point, even though the applicant is only one of 13 parcels and only 6% of the land area. As shown on the maps, it's completely surrounded by 7 other neighbors, 74%, which is designated CMU 35, a mixed-use designation, and the other 2 are Hula Bay, a tiki bar restaurant, and the U.S. Army Training Center. All of these facilities today have workers, our customers, or in the case of the Army Training Facility, teachers and students. Today, shouldn't the onus be on the applicant to make sure everyone is safe and sound and not their neighbors? My second concern is the applicant focuses only on residential uses. Except for Hula Bay, all the property is zoned industrial today, which allows for a full range of office uses, meaning that Rattlesnake Point can today easily redevelop into another West Shore multi-story office park without a single rezoning needing to be filed. If all the applicant's neighbors redeveloped, that's potentially almost 5 million square feet of professional office space with, I estimate, potentially 9,000 workers. Number 3, the applicant focuses only on new residential rezonings, ignoring the parcels that are already zoned residential and that are already under construction within 1,500 feet of the applicant's property. These include West Shore Marina, already approved for 1,750 residential units, and West Shore Yacht Club, approved for 660 units. And 4, probably my greatest concern, is there's nothing in this text amendment that requires a greater level of responsibility from the applicant, the sole property owner on the point that wants this amendment. I recall that there used to be a federal regulation that required industries to provide chemical spill response plans to the public and first responders, like the fire department, so they can review it and know what's going on. The Regional Planning Council used to keep those plans. The program has apparently changed. TBRPC doesn't store them anymore, doesn't know who keeps them. I've asked other agencies, including EPC, if they know if there are any response plans, and so far out of luck. And so I would request the applicant submit their accidental chemical spill response plan to the other neighbors like us, as well as other property owners in the greater neighborhood for our review and comment. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Gina Grimes with the law firm of Hill, Ward, Henderson, 101 East Kennedy Boulevard. And I'm here tonight on behalf of Viper Ventures, LLC. Viper Ventures owns 31 acres on the northwest tip of Rattlesnake Point. And Viper Ventures was also the applicant of that 2016 text amendment that you heard addressed earlier. That was the text amendment that relaxed the restriction on residential development on Rattlesnake Point. And as you heard, that text amendment was unanimously adopted by Tampa City Council. Why did they do that? Because they recognized that the comp plan policy that we're discussing here today starts with encourage the transition from its current mix of heavy and light industrial to a mix of residential and commercial. However, this proposed text amendment by chemical formulators does not encourage the transition. In fact, it does just the opposite. It discourages it, and it preserves or protects the industrial at the expense of the residential. We believe that the text amendment is arbitrary and capricious, and it's also inequitable, and there's 2 reasons we believe that. The first reason is that it arbitrarily isolates or targets residential uses only, but then it allows, as you heard from Kevin, massive amounts of commercial or office development without any restrictions whatsoever. And keep in mind that this comp plan amendment is theoretically based on safety, the safety of the occupants on Rattlesnake Point. But under the current zoning and land use, over 5 million square feet of office and commercial development can be built on the 75 acres without any restrictions. This would amount to or yield about 10,000 office workers. But for some reason, Chemical Formulators is not proposing any type of restrictions whatsoever on office or commercial users or their safety. And when you think about it, they're probably more at risk than residences because the office workers are going to be there during the day when the chlorine bleach facility is in operation. The second reason we think that the comp plan amendment is arbitrary, capricious, and inequitable is because no other residential development adjacent or near industrial uses is subject to the same type of restriction as being proposed by chemical formulators. In other areas of the city, for example, the Port of Tampa, which is close to the residential on Harbor Island, close to the residential on Davis Island, and close to the residential on Palmetto Beach, there are no restrictions whatsoever on that residential, nor even on that industrial as far as other than being generally compatible, but no restrictions like chemical formulators is proposing. Also, chemical formulators is almost as close to two adjacent residential developments, West Shore Yacht Club and the West Shore Marina. But they never made an issue at that point in time of the safety of the residents in those communities. We think they're arbitrarily targeting Rattlesnake Point only, and we think they're selectively and arbitrarily and capriciously targeting the residential. And you're going to hear from the next speaker why we think that's so. But in closing, we would request that you not act in an arbitrary and capricious manner as they've requested, and find the comp plan inconsistent with find the comp plan amendment inconsistent with the plan because it fails to allow the transition from industrial to residential. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, honorable members of the Commission. I'm Kate Wells with the law firm of Shoemaker, Lubick, Hendrick at 101 East Kennedy Boulevard, Suite 2800 in Tampa, Florida. I appear before you this evening on behalf of Sagent Properties, LLC, the owner of the property located at 5105 West Tyson Avenue within the Rattlesnake Point waterfront area. I last appeared before you on November 13th, 2017, on a map amendment to change the land use designation from heavy industrial to CMU 35. At that time, Council for Chemical Formulators attempted to introduce revisions to the Rattlesnake Point policies in order to delay consideration of my client's map amendment. Notwithstanding chemical formulators' alleged concerns about public health and safety, City Council unanimously approved the map amendment. Since that tactic did not result in the desired outcome, Chemical Formulators is again before you seeking to undermine and derail the transition that is encouraged in Land Use Objective 8.11 from the current mix of heavy and light industrial uses to a mix of residential and commercial retail uses. The application will undermine the City Council's clear and consistent direction, is inconsistent with the express language in Land Use Objective 8.11 and is unnecessary given the language in Policy 8.11.5, which currently requires plan development rezonings to address hazards associated with heavy industrial uses through design and accepted practices at the time of the PD rezoning. I submit to you that the proposed text amendment is yet another attempt by chemical formulators to simply increase the purchase price of the land it sits on. During the City Council public hearing on November 30th, 2017, on my client's application for map amendment to CMU 35, Jim Palmer, who is the president and CEO of Allied Universal Corporation, who owns Gandy View Realty, who owns the parcel upon which Chemical Formulator sits, testified. So let me go back. At the end of the day, we just want to basically have the time and the ability to make a transition to move somewhere that's geographically close enough. He went on to say, we've been a good steward in the community. We want to continue to be. We want to continue to be a part of this community. But we need the time and the ability to be able to make a move somewhere else for a very unique site. I mean, with rail and ship abilities. Yoli Kapin then said, like the Port of Tampa, the response, that could be a possibility, yes. Louis Vieira went on to say, as Councilman Cohen said, it's about a transition both for this body in terms of our stated purposes and apparently your company, respectively, in terms of moving plans. So moving is something that is in the foreseeable cards for you. The response, we're not opposed to moving at all. Basically, we have spent $20 million or so out of that facility. We need to be kept whole. Bob Namath, chairman of Allied Universal and CFI, discussed the need for a new site. His words exactly, we don't have a problem with transitioning, but what does transitioning mean? This is the question the commissioner asked, and it's a valid question. Nobody said we'll help you. We suggested back in 2005, help move us to another location and we'll move. Nobody has contacted us yet. So I hope that answers your question. We're happy to accommodate. We're not trying to stop growth, as Mr. Palmer said. Growth is great for our company, but if you want to move us, please somebody offer to assist. We need to find a new site. There may be some around, but we don't know until somebody wants our property. I submit to you that is the purpose of tonight's text amendment. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Elise Batzel with the law firm of Phelps Dunbar at 100 South Ashley Drive, Suite 1900. I am here on behalf of Orion Marine Construction. They own the property that is at the southwest corner, directly south of the Viper Ventures property. They are currently an industrial use along with Bertram's Yachts, and we are also here with this group of owners to object to the proposed text amendment. So it's not limited to residential uses or incoming residential. It's the actual light industrial that is on that peninsula right now that wants to see this transition happen in the way that was meant over the last decade. You've heard from a number of us tonight that are here together where residential uses, commercial uses, and industrial uses, asking you to deny this application. Mr. Mechanic told you the history as it relates to Rattlesnake Point. 7 different amendments, and over the course of 11 years, this is the plan that has been put together and advocated and supposed to have been transitioned for the last decade. The city did not come up with the proper transition plan, so the owners that owned property out there did it on their own. That's why we have the existing amendment the existing text as it is today. You've also heard that what's being proposed is arbitrary and capricious. It makes no sense to me as a citizen, as a lawyer, as a residential real estate professional why it's important to protect residential development and residential citizens, but it's not the office workers that can be on the point. The Army, the folks that work at the Army base that are there, everyone deserves equal protection. It also doesn't make sense to me why we would be protecting residents on Rattlesnake Point more than the others that have been pointed out. Davis Islands, Harbor Island, the port, Palmetto Beach. If this is truly an issue that we need to address, we need to look back at a citywide level and say, what is it we're trying to accomplish? What are the concerns? And address it in a manner that makes more sense, rather than a small, teeny peninsula from one particular owner that really perhaps is motivated, as you heard, by special concerns. The intent of the comp plan for the last 10 years is to transition from heavy industrial to a mix of uses. That includes all of these uses. That includes light industrial, commercial, and residential. And that is exactly what's happening. The market is driving this change now. The proposed text amendment isn't necessary. We believe that it's arbitrary and capricious, and we believe that it's really taking a step back from what was put in place a decade ago and continued over the last 11 years. We collectively have all been here before you, having the same conversation. And so we would ask you again this evening to deny the text amendment. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Before I ask for rebuttal, is there anybody else that wishes to address the commission?
Commissioners, good evening. Jake Kramer with Stearns Weaver Miller, 401 East Jackson Street, number 2100. Apologize for the voice. I'm suffering from allergies. Don't worry, I'm not sick. I'm here. David probably thinks that no good deed goes unpunished. We're actually here objecting to staff's recommendation because we feel that even though it was good and well-intentioned, that it makes matters more confusing. This is the West Shore Marina District. The West Shore Marina District is between Gandy and West Shore and Tyson Avenue. West Shore Marina District has been in various phases of development for about 14 years now. No part of it has ever been considered to be within the Rattlesnake Point. You heard Ms. Batzel and Ms. Zellman mention that there was this coalition or this group of landowners on Rattlesnake Point, 9 of them that got together and negotiated the original Rattlesnake Point policies. My clients Newport Tampa Bay CDD Holdings LLC, the master developer of West Shore Marina District, and Lennar Homes. Lennar's purchasing 2 parcels within that development. Neither they nor their predecessor property owners were ever included in that group that developed the Rattlesnake Point policies. This is the map that City Council adopted in 2007 after that group of landowners got together to adopt policies related to Rattlesnake Point. As you can see, West Shore Marina District is here, and no part of it was included. The reason for that, this is a map. I apologize for the quality. It's the best I was able to get in the public records, but this was a map, a parcel map that Tampa City staff created of what they felt was Rattlesnake Point at the time. And forgive me for beating the dead horse, but this was a map submitted by one of the property owners at that time of what everyone thought Rattlesnake Point was. It was 9 property owners, not including West Shore Marina District. So this shows the difference between staff's proposal of 1,300 feet and the 1,600 feet that my clients are proposing. It's only 300 feet. So what we're proposing is in the letter that I distributed. I distributed that to staff this morning. I apologize for the late notice on that. But essentially what we're proposing is that instead of the 1,300 feet language that staff is proposing, we're proposing that we go back to the original intent of what everyone understood back in 2007 and has considered or everyone has agreed upon that until just recently. So what we're proposing is that we insert this map into the comprehensive plan so it's clear once and for all what's Rattlesnake Point. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Rebuttal. I get it one right tonight.
I'll try to keep it brief. Commissioners, I would ask you to go into your packet and look at the page where we have the plan amendment. I mean, to hear everyone talk, you would think we were radically changing the comp plan policies, and we're not. The policies talk about CMU 35. We changed that to any category with residential uses. The language about having to demonstrate through design and accepted practices that occupants won't be at risk was added in 2016. The only thing we're changing is we're saying that should apply to any plan amendment that has residential uses, not just CMU 35, because as noted, there are other plan categories that are mixed use with residential uses. And just to quickly go through the points that were made, Mr. Mechanic said there's been 7 plan amendments on Rattlesnake Point, but I think all but one of those were done at a time when the comp plan still read that you couldn't then rezone the property to residential use until the hazardous uses were gone. So it was a different period of time that the comp plan amendments changing it to CMU 35 were adopted. And he said that in 2016, the City Council adopted these safeguards requiring the demonstration through design and accepted practices. We didn't do away with those. I think we've made them better. The question was raised, well, why only protect residents and not office and commercial users? There is a difference. There's a difference when people are there 24 hours. There's a difference when, children are living there. There just is a difference between the intensity of residential uses versus office and commercial workers. The other thing I want to point out is, everyone says, well, there's other parts of the city where there's chemical users near residential. The reason Rattlesnake Point is different, and I apologize for not commenting on this at the beginning, is it's very unique. It's a peninsula where there's one road in and one road out, and what sets the 9 properties that Mr. Kramer referred to apart from even his client's property is that's the only access they have. It's one road in, one road out. And if you look at the EPC letter and the EPC comments on these plan amendments in the past, that's the biggest concern, is that if an evacuation had to occur, it would be very difficult with the one road in and the one road out. Mr. Manier raised questions about whether my applicant has an evacuation safety plan. I assure you they are subject to all kinds of regulations, and I'm sure we can provide him and the other property owners with the plan. And yes, they are subject to many regulations to ensure safety. But, you know, it's unfortunately, occasionally a spill does occur. I don't know that one has occurred at their facility, but it could, and that's the concern. And then finally, the other point I wanted to make, with regard to Mr. Kramer's proposal, I do believe that makes sense. That was the historical background behind the original 2006-2007 change. And again, the reason his property is distinct from the other properties on the point is that they have other means of getting out. They have access to West Shore and Bridge Street. The other properties only have one road in, one road out. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
Question for David or City of Tampa representative. We've been over this thing numerous times, and the failure sits at the City of Tampa not doing a formal transition plan. There are property owners who have inherent rights by the use of their property, like the chemical formulators, to do heavy industrial and not to worry about having a 100-unit apartment building be built next door, or then their code enforcement out of business after, you know, a couple of years of complaints. Has the City of Tampa addressed any of these issues with regards to this transition? Because there is an investment value that is not equated to residential value. I mean, the heavy industrial value is, I could see where Viper Ventures has an issue. I mean, they've invested capital improvements. All these properties have done that. But then to have them say, hey, you're going to transition to residential, that's great. But is the residential developer going to write a check for, let's say it's $20 million? I mean, there has to be some sort of plan. I think that came up in one of the presentations that the City of Tampa may have to, if they want this to be residential, may have to write some checks.
Good evening, LaShawn Dock, Planning and Development, and I can certainly understand your concerns. Initially, the city was supposed to do the transition plan, and that never occurred, and that is why the last amendment that came before you, the text amendment, was proposed as a solution instead of waiting for that to occur.
Right.
And that language was, and that removed the original language for the city to do that plan and put the new language, which you have in place now, within the comp plan.
It seems like it still hasn't completely resolved. I mean, I think this is going to be a step that's going to help, but it certainly is a mess. I appreciate y'all's help. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we find 18-03 text amendment consistent with the Tampa 2040 Comprehensive Plan and forward to the Tampa City Council.
I have a motion by Commissioner Buzza and a second by Commissioner Dix. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Those opposed? Nay. Commissioner Reno in objection. Motion passes. That brings us, where am I? Uh-oh.
Can I ask for clarification about, that was including the staff language, the language staff recommended in addition to the applicants?
That was what I understood.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, yes, thank you, okay.
Okay. We are to item number 10, Mr. Lacola.
Good evening, Commissioners. Tony Lacola, Planning Commission staff. Our last item for the evening It's been a long day. Future land use map amendment 1806 for the city of Tampa. The map amendment is located in the West Shore Planning District, which also includes the West Shore Business District. And some of you might have heard about this amendment in the news or on TV. It's related to the Midtown Tampa project. You can see on the map approximately where it's located, related to the other map amendments. So the background, this is a privately initiated amendment, small scale, comprised of about 13 parcels on 3.56 acres. The applicant is requesting a land use change from Community Commercial 35, which typically allows for medium intensity and density, mixed use and single use commercial and residential, to a regional mixed use 100, which would allow for high intensity or density, high rise residential office and regional serving commercial. This is an aerial view of the subject site. This is I-275 on the north. You have Cypress to the south, Himes, North Himes Avenue on the east side, and Dale Mabry on the west. There's the Target shopping center up here, Walmart, J. Alexander's down in this location. So most of you have probably been over in there and familiar with the area. It's been vacant for quite some time. Here are street level views of the subject site. The first picture on your left is looking northwest, and this isn't each individual parcel. It's kind of hard because it's just 13 parcels all together mixed with other parcels that already have regional mixed use 100. So you'll see as we go through the progression. So looking northwest on the left-hand side, looking north on the right-hand side, looking northeast on the left-hand side, and then looking to the east on the right-hand side. So you can see the majority of it is vacant. There are some commercial businesses along Cypress and then up on the north side near Himes. This is east of the subject site, and then on the left, or sorry, the right side is south of the subject site along Cypress. This is the adopted future land use map as it currently exists. The purple color is that regional mixed use 100. The red is the commercial 35, community commercial 35. And then you also have a mix of community mixed use 35, which is that light purple. And then you've got residential 20 in brown and residential 10 in the salmon color. This is the proposed future land use map with the 13 parcels indicated with the regional mixed use 100. So you can see how it relates. All of the parcels within this area are under the same property ownership. So what would the impacts be? Under the community commercial, which currently exists, up to 124 dwelling units on those 13 parcels, or 310,146 square feet of non-residential use. If the proposed amendment is approved, regional mixed use 100 would allow for 356 units, or 542,755 square feet of non-residential uses. There were comments from the reviewing agencies, two in particular. FDOT raised concerns about the safety and operation for the I-275 Dale Mabry and I-275 Himes Avenue interchanges and asked that the developer work with FDOT as they move forward with the project in the future. Hart also had concerns related to pedestrian and ADA access to public transportation, which also should be addressed in the zoning stage, site design stage. Planning Commission staff found the proposed amendment consistent with the comprehensive plan based on the goals, objectives, and policies, which you see on your screen. The first one is related to city design. The comp plan recognizes the West Shore District as the state's largest office and community and it encourages transit-oriented and mixed-use development in the district. Staff believes the plan amendment will ensure continued growth as the city continues to add to its population and employment base. It will also help encourage additional tax base, housing and employment opportunities. In addition, the comprehensive plan speaks to city planning strategies, which would allow for additional infill and a more efficient use of land within the city of Tampa. Mixed-use corridors, mixed-use centers and corridors are also addressed. The trend for the area, for the West Shore Business District, has been toward increased density and more mix of uses, especially along its major corridors. And with this amendment, we looked at other amendments in the area. There were 9 plan amendments within a mile of this particular site, all requesting increase in intensity or density over the past few years. All of those were approved by City Council. As far as growth is concerned, it would allow for, as I said before, additional households and employment growth as the city adds to its population. And with that, staff recommends you find the proposed map amendment 18-06 consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Tampa Comprehensive Plan. And I'm here for questions as well as the applicant. The applicant might want to make a statement.
Thank you, Tony. The applicant wish to make a presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Mark Bentley, 401 East Jackson Street. I represent the applicant in connection with this amendment. The project, you might have heard about the project. It goes by the name now of Midtown. It used to be Tampa Bay 1, but in any event, it's received a lot of notoriety lately, especially in light of the fact that they've announced the lease with Whole Foods at the northeast corner of Cypress and Dale Mabry. So it's about a 1.8 million square foot mixed-use project. And we've got plenty of entitlements, and that's not what the issue is here tonight. We have so many entitlements, we really have a surplus, and unfortunately, there's no transfer of development rights provision in the code. Otherwise, we have a fire sale on those. But even without the amendment, we have 2.3 million square feet, okay? But what came up during the development process is we didn't realize that the majority of the projects are RMU 100, but these small pockets of CC 35 that Tony explained to you, we didn't realize in the city of Tampa, notwithstanding the fact that you might have a unified development, a planned development, one big project, that you can't transfer square footage between different categories. So that's the dilemma. Actually, our final zoning hearing is scheduled for this Thursday in front of City Council. As a condition of the zoning, we had to go through the plan amendment process. But what I'll show you here is this is the entire project. It's roughly 20 acres. But there's these 3 pockets of CC 35 that we exceed with our site plan. The square footage is allowed under your comp plan. So, okay. So the bottom line, when all the smoke clears, this plan amendment's about 232,000 square feet that we really don't need, but we just need to transfer them to a certain part of the project. So I hope I made that clear to you. If not, you probably want to get the heck out of here anyhow. But I just want to make one point, though. Make one point to you. There's been a plan amendment, submerged lands, and this one goes all the way to the heavens. It does, Trace, right? It does. So this is going all the way to the heavens. I just want to make that clear. So we've seen everything tonight. You're both lawyers, right? Yeah, you agree.
I'm ready to vote. Thank you, Mr. Bentley.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the public who wishes to address the commission on this agenda item? Seeing none, there's no need for rebuttal. Any questions from commissioners? Seeing none, oh, wait a minute. Okay, Mr. Metzger.
I have a question that'll be in 17 parts, so get comfortable. No, I don't have a question, but I'm ready to make a motion if there are no.
There he goes. He's jumping the gun. I will entertain a motion.
I would move that we find TPA 1806 consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Imagine 2040 Tampa Comprehensive Plan.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Metzger and a second by Commissioner Marino. Is there any discussion? Are you sure? Okay, all those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries unanimously by members present.
Have a good night. Take care.
We are adjourned.